You're wasting our time. You're not going to get us to not believe in evolution.
And why is that?
Because the smartest scientists in the entire world all agree that it's real.
I'm glad you brought that up. Because, Mr. Reynolds, science is a liar sometimes.
Oh, boy.
This is Aristotle, thought to be the smartest man on the planet. He believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everybody believed him because he was so smart. Until another smartest guy came around, Galileo, and he disproved that theory, making Aristotle and everybody else on Earth look like a bitch. Of course, Galileo then thought comets were an optical illusion, and there's no way that the moon could cause the ocean's tides. Everybody believed that because he was so smart. He was also wrong, making him and everyone else on Earth look like a bitch again. And then, best of all, Sir Isaac Newton gets born and blows everybody's nips off with his big brains. Of course, he also thought he could turn metal into gold and died eating mercury, making him yet another stupid bitch. Are you seeing a pattern?
No.
Mr. Reynolds, these were all the smartest scientists on the planet. Only problem is, they kept being wrong. Sometimes.
Oh, this is insane, you fool!
I'm a fool because I have more faith in the saints that wrote the Bible?
Yeah, because you just read the words of a bunch of guys that you never met, and you just take it on faith that everything they wrote was true.
And what makes you think what your scientists are writing is any more truer than my saints?
Because there are volumes of proven data, numbers, figures. There are fossil records.
Oh, fossil records. I didn't even think about the fossil records. I guess I'll concede. Oh, wait, one more thing before I do, Mr. Reynolds. Have you seen these fossil records?
Have I? Huh?
Have you poured through the data yourself? The numbers, the figures?
Well, no. No.
Oh, interesting. So let me get this straight, Mr. Reynolds. You get your information from a book written by men you've never met. And you take their words as truth based on a willingness to believe, a desire to accept, a leap of, dare I say it, faith?
Come on. Look, I don't even know how I'm supposed to respond to that. Come on. That's a false equivalency.
Just answer the question, Mr. Reynolds.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
I rest my case.
Welcome back to the Benjy and Cal podcast. This is episode 10, Science Part 2.
Yeah.
Seeing a pattern here, Cal.
We started with 1, now we're at 2.
Oh my gosh.
Crazy.
So what you just listened to was one of my favorite episodes of Always Sunny in Philadelphia concerning science and creationism versus evolution, where one of the characters, Mac, proceeds to explain how all of a sudden, there are revolutions in science when what was previously thought to be true is all of a sudden looks stupid because a new theory has come along and just blown that one out of the water. And he takes this to the extreme and he says this demonstrates science can never be trusted, and therefore who knows what'll be in the future, and we should just accept creationism because he's one with God. He takes the word of the Bible literally, and he's also an American. He's dug in.
By the way, is that actually a thing in the show that his character is very religious like that and takes the Bible literally?
Yes, but then he also comes out of the closet later.
Okay.
So, these characters in the show are not the most consistent of people.
Well, there have been religious people who have been gay.
For sure. But, and he denies it at first.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, there are other characters like Charlie. Sometimes he's, most of the time he's dumb. He's supposed to be the dumbest one. But then he also plays like the straight man sometimes, where he's like, what are you guys doing? You guys are ridiculous.
Wait, in the clip that we just saw, which one's Charlie?
He's the one that like makes a face when he hears that Isaac Newton drank mercury and got poisoning.
He's the one who says no at the end?
No, that's Dennis.
Okay.
But Charlie makes a face and he's like, "Oh, he's drinking mercury."
Wait,
but then
Charlie
like
Charlie is Danny DeVito?
drinks paint. No, Danny DeVito's just Danny.
Okay. Wait, so
Frank. He's Frank Reynolds.
There are 4 men?
Yeah.
Okay.
In that clip,
All right.
we see Danny.
I missed somebody. I can't think of the 4th man.
Well, Max talking.
Yeah.
Charlie. Okay, you can't think of it. Okay.
I can't think of him. Sorry.
It will be added in post.
Mm-hmm.
You'll all be able to. You'll have watched the clip along with all of us, I guess. So last time we were discussing what is science, what is it not, and we discussed that most of it, in fact, in my opinion, all of it is just the method, but a lot of people extend it to as being, the community and the body of knowledge as well. But we spoke a lot about how it has to be testable. Like it's a bunch of theories that are proposed, and then the method of science says we test it. It must be falsifiable. There must be conditions under which the theory might be shown to be untrue. So testability and falsifiability. There's objectivity, where it tries to minimize bias in observations and interpretations. There's replicability, where other scientists have to be able to demonstrate and repeat the same experiment, to show that the theory is true, or that there's lots of evidence in favor of this theory. Some people say that the collaboration is very important, that you share and build upon the knowledge of others. Otherwise, one person working by himself is never going to reach the same lengths that he can by working with others. He'll have to rediscover the wheel. As Einstein said, he saw further by standing on the shoulders of giants, meaning he's referencing scientific giants like Newton, where even though he proved Newton wrong in the extreme cases and ultimately all cases, he still acknowledges that without Newton he couldn't have been where he got to, because he would have had to start from square one and start with what Newton discovered.
That's something that is definitely not unique to science. It's something that exists in every discipline, where you build on what has come before you and you try to kind of structure the information and the progress that has been made in the discipline and document it for the future generations so that they can build off of it, and so that people don't start from square one. Right. Religious scholarship is like this as well. Any field, psychology, even like Neo doesn't become the one in the Matrix and defeat the Agent Smith without being trained by Morpheus. So it's meaning we're describing things about science, which is good, but we're also describing things that are, I think, not intrinsic to what science is that makes it unique from other disciplines, but also just things that are in every discipline.
Exactly, which is kind of why this kind of demonstrates that science really is ultimately just the method, because I was going to bring up what is the difference between this and religion. When it comes, there's collaboration in religion, like you said, sharing, building upon the knowledge. It's in many cases it could be ongoing. For example, rabbinic Judaism, maybe it's slow, but it does undergo changes. Mm-hmm. There are always new commentaries that build on others. It's a body of knowledge for sure. It's a theory in a way. It explains things about the universe, about life, how things came to be, mm-hmm. how things work. Where it really changes is in testability, falsifiability. It's a study of faith. It's a movement of faith. It's a field of faith, and you don't have this replicability that you have in science.
Interesting. I wonder if it makes sense to separate the kind of discipline of communal religion, or the way communal religion develops. I'm definitely thinking specifically about Judaism here because I don't know exactly what kind of rules Christianity has when it comes to like what change is possible, what are the fundamental premises. But thinking of rabbinic Judaism, we can separate between the kind of discipline that is the Talmud brings I think 13 principles of biblical exegesis, the 13 ways in which the rabbis can derive information from the scriptures. And so that you could say is like an axiom of rabbinic Judaism, and then you can build things off of that. And there are other things like that. And when you study the Talmud, I don't know about the Talmud is not widely studied, of course, but when anyone studies the Talmud itself has these sort of like rules that it works with, and then tries to derive additional things from those rules. So I wonder if you could separate that from the kind of personal religion, which is personal spirituality and faith and connection with the transcendent and the eternal. That I don't think is testable or replicable, and definitely is a matter of faith. But there is a similarity, I think, between the kind of structured communal religion and science, just in the fact that, well, maybe the difference is just that the axioms are different. And it's not. I'm not saying that there's an equivalency here, because the axioms of science, I think, are grounded in pure logic and an attempt to get to the most fundamental axiom possible, to not take anything for granted and just start with that which is necessary to take for granted. Like, if we can observe it, if we can replicate it, then we'll accept it as true. We won't say like, oh, maybe the physical world doesn't exist. Well, for the purposes of science, we won't go down that route. We'll take as an axiom that the physical world exists, which I think, of course, is necessary and is more fundamental and an attempt to get to the heart of things than an axiom of there's a particular principle of biblical exegesis, which is if the same word, it's called a gezerah shava in Hebrew. It's if the same word is used in two different places, it can kind of be used to hint to something. I can't even. It's a very even when you learn the principle, it's a bit of a flimsy principle. It's unclear how it can be applied. It's certainly applied, but
yeah, it's like if you see the same word in one story and another story, then there's some underlying connection here, and that
right.
You could say, oh, whatever the character in this Bible story did here, we could say this is what his motivation was, for example, in this other Bible story.
Yeah, well, it's unclear what exact connection you're allowed to conclude from that. But yes, right. because this particular Bible story used this specific word, and then that specific word appears in a different Bible story, so the Talmud will sometimes make a connection between the two and derive some conclusion. But frankly, it's usually unclear why that allows you to make that specific conclusion and not some other conclusion where you connected the two stories.
So there are these underlying principles in both, at least rabbinic Judaism. There's also the Rambam. He was a famous medieval Jewish scholar living in the Arab Empire. I forget what it's called exactly.
Maimonides in English is his name.
Yeah. And he has 13 principles from which everything was derived, because he also wanted to formulate religion in a way where everything can be derived from these principles. So you're saying there might be similarities. We should separate the community aspect of religion from its purely logical aspect. The same probably with science, and that you're also saying that the scientific principles, those are more subject to change. I think the whole idea of, Maimonides' principles is that they don't change, like the laws of exegesis don't change. In science, being axioms, they're not supposed to change, but theoretically they can if enough evidence opens up in their favor.
Well, hold on. I think so. Like the laws that science discovers, those could change if enough evidence were to contradict it. But the axioms, I think, are something more fundamental. Like the axioms are what allow science to be possible. That logic is valid, that the physical world exists, that it can be observed by us, things like that.
Right. But as we'll discuss in a bit, the axioms of science have changed over time a bit.
Okay, you'll have to enlighten me.
Science had started before logic was formalized, was really like set down, where I forget his name, de Moivre, a French logician, came up, modus ponens, some of these logical, binary operators, Boolean logic. Science existed before Boolean logic was written down exactly how it is.
Well, yeah, but that's fine. Because Boolean logic was formulated much later than logic was. Logic was used long before Boolean logic was.
But logic was refined. Like even in Judaic logic, there's the concept of kal v'chomer, which means how much more so. I don't know if there's a better English translation.
Yeah, it can't really be translated. You just have to explain what the concept is.
But it's like a pretty obvious logical concept that if something applies in one case, then in a more stringent case, like obviously it should apply.
Right.
Yeah. So
like if you're
like stealing from someone, let's say you go to jail, obviously if you murder someone, you should go to jail because it's even more of a severe punishment.
Yeah. Exactly. If you start with the premise that murder is more severe than theft, and you have some consequence for theft, then the consequence for murder should, kal v'chomer, by this principle, be at least as severe as the consequence of theft.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a more definitely a more sound logical principle, but it's one of the 13, I guess, that were laid down.
I think so. Well, I just want to clarify something because the principles that Maimonides listed are not the same ones that the Talmud lists for deriving information from the Bible, and the ones that the Maimonides listed are not. I wouldn't say they're so much axioms for the sake of further derivation of information, but rather they're the 13 tenets of Jewish faith. So they're more framed as the things that every Jew needs to believe in order to be a proper Jew, like the things that are beyond debate in Judaism, though they were very much debated at the time. So he tried to say that these are the 13 things that are beyond debate in Judaism, which themselves were debated when he came out with them. But it seems to be a bit of a different concept between that and the axioms of a way of developing information.
Okay, so we'll get back, I think, to more of what we were saying there about what are the axioms of science, can they change? And that's what we really want to talk about this episode, revolutions of science in science. But to start, we want to talk about more describe science in terms of like the branches of science. We have the natural sciences, so those study the physical world. That's physics, chemistry, biology, geology, astronomy, for example. Most of these use the scientific method. You have researchers, they come up with theories to try to further the current understanding of the universe.
Most of what use the scientific method?
Like physics, chemistry, biology, geology, astronomy. But sometimes, it's overextended, in my opinion. Like if NASA releases a nice picture of the Andromeda Galaxy, everyone's like, oh, science. But that's just taking a technology which already existed and just pointing it at someplace else. Maybe, like, if they're saying, let's point it at this area of the sky where we have no information, and then they discover, hey, there's billions of galaxies we didn't see before. So that's a hypothesis. They tested it. The hypothesis is maybe, I'll bet something exists there, or nothing exists there. Either way, it's falsifiable in a way, or nothing can be observed. And then when they take that picture, which is what they did with, that was one of the big Hubble discoveries, the deep field, where they just pointed on a dark area of space. I mean, it's all dark, but like an especially dark. And then they still found billions of galaxies.
Mm.
And
Wait, what is Hubble?
Hubble is one of the first big telescopes that's orbiting Earth that is able to was able to take really good high definition pictures of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's launched, I think, 80s, because I know the space shuttle was sent to repair one of the mirrors on the Hubble Space Telescope when it broke, and now it's towards the end of its time, and it's been replaced with the James Webb Telescope, which is more, I think, to view in infrared, so not visible light. A lot of the universe, when we look at it with the naked eye, we won't see a lot. It looks green, it looks fuzzy. It's only when we look at it through different wavelengths of light that we get these really spectacular images with the red and the yellow and the blue,
Mm-hmm.
the green. So those have all been processed in a way. So it's important to know that when you're looking at one of these pictures that was taken by a telescope, it's been processed. It doesn't look like that if you could just see far enough with your naked eye.
Okay.
The same with the Milky Way. Sometimes you see pictures of night taken from Earth that are like a really spectacular Milky Way picture, and that's just not how it looks. It looks more fuzzy when you go out to the middle of nowhere and look at the Milky Way.
Makes sense. Out of curiosity, how far can the Hubble Space Telescope or the James Webb Telescope, how far can they see out into space?
Mm-hmm. So they look pretty much as far as close to the beginning of the universe. So what that means is they're not just looking in space, they're looking back in time. Because when you look at something so far away, the light itself had to travel through time to get to you. So when you look at the Andromeda Galaxy, which is 100 million light years away, that means you're looking at the same light that left when
100 million years
the
ago.
dinosaurs were roaming.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm thinking a million years, but one of those.
But the point is, you're looking at the state of the Andromeda Galaxy 100 million years ago.
Exactly.
It's impossible to see it now because it takes 100 million years for the light of it to get to you.
Mm-hmm. Which means that even if you traveled at the speed of light, which is the fastest you can travel in the universe, to the Andromeda Galaxy, by the time you get there, even if it's instantaneous, because that's how fast light is basically when you get to that, but you can't because you have mass. But theoretically, from the perspective of a photon, which is a massless particle sent towards the Andromeda Galaxy, he gets there and it's 100 million years have passed on Earth. So if he wants to turn around and fly back to Earth, it'll take another 100 million years. So to him, the trip is instantaneous. But when he gets back, 200 million years will have passed on Earth.
Mm.
Which is...
Yeah, that's wild.
Which is a crazy concept. That's the theory of relativity. It's very counterintuitive.
It's the premise. It's the premise of the Planet of the Apes movie.
Yeah, the new one or the old one?
The old one.
The old one. And it's a little sad because you can never visit because you'll have to say goodbye to everything and everyone you know on Earth, and by the time you get back, we might not be here.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have evolved to I don't know.
It's
just
not
robots.
Yeah, it's not like moving to another country on Earth and then you can still visit your family. It's like you're
saying goodbye to everything.
You're saying goodbye. Yeah, you're leaving.
Mm-hmm. And so the Hubble Space Telescope can, the Andromeda Galaxy is the closest galaxy, so it can see to the furthest galaxies, where it sees galaxies that are just forming. So they're being birthed because it's looking back towards the beginning of time. So it's looking back. It's able to look back 12, 13 billion years ago because you can't see past that point anyways. So you'll be looking back at nothing, because nothing can have traveled from the beginning of the universe to the point where you're looking from. It could be, and it's very likely that, so that's the observable universe. It's very likely that the unobservable universe extends far past that. And because why would it just end right at our limit? If it's more likely that, space, time, and the universe the Big Bang Theory happened everywhere all at once. And so everything expanded from every viewpoint, not just our viewpoint. And so there's a universe beyond how far back we could see to the beginning of time. And there are different theories. It's very difficult to know and very difficult to test, but maybe it wraps around itself. Maybe there are multiverse universes elsewhere. Maybe it extends infinitely. That's the question of, like, is the universe flat? If it's flat, then it just keeps going. If it's round, then it curves back on itself. If it's parabolic, then it extends infinitely. So maybe if it's flat, it's finite. Maybe that's the distinction.
So all of that got pretty complex. Are you trying to explain, like, the question of what exists if the universe is finite? If the Big Bang began the universe, so what was before the Big Bang? And if the universe is, like, here expanding, what's here?
Yeah.
Is that what we're trying to explain right now?
Well, I just kind of got off track because you asked about the Hubble Space Telescope, and I just find fascinating. But it is very important to consider when thinking about the limits of science, of what we can know, and what is beyond is a very, or what was before the universe. It's the limits. It does all our logic of science, math. It just breaks down. Because what is before nothing? What is before, when time is zero, before that, nothing existed, nothing makes sense. It doesn't even make sense to talk about. Or outside the universe. Unless it has some effect on our universe, we can't know.
Well, isn't it, there must have been things, and I'll explain what I mean by things in a moment, but there must have been things before the Big Bang, because the very process of the Big Bang is reliant on physical laws, right? So physical laws must what's that word?
Predate?
Not predate. I'm looking for a causative, or prior causatively. That's what the word I'm looking for, not prior temporally. Although, I guess prior temporally as well. But
Predicate? No.
Maybe. But anyway, so I think we can be pretty confident that there are aspects of reality, and I'm using the word reality now as opposed to the universe in order to get something bigger than the universe. There are aspects of reality that exist and must have existed before the Big Bang, because the Big Bang itself was reliant on those things existing. Is that fair?
Well, according to scientific thought, everything just started at the Big Bang. There was nothing before. There are theories, okay, maybe, the universe was constantly expanding, and then it eventually, like, collapsed in on itself and formed another Big Bang. So it's just a cycle that goes on forever. Or maybe there was another multiverse that started this one. Maybe we're just all living inside a black hole. Maybe, we're just inside the atom of another universe beyond us. But we don't know. We can't say that something caused this universe, because as far as we know, there was nothing, and we have no way to see it. So even if we accept your logic that something came before it, well, then something must have come before that in order to predicate that logic. So
yeah,
your own logic suggests an infinite existence.
Maybe, or because the universe, we're talking about the physical universe, and it could be that from a certain point of view, that is the universe. There is only the physical universe. There is nothing else other than the physical. But I think in this discussion of science, we ourselves even if we are accepting a physicalist worldview, which is a phrase that we said several times in the last episode,
Realism might be the formal name for it.
maybe. I thought physicalism
They're
was
both
pretty
good.
pretty formal. Okay.
I will.
Is there a distinction?
No, I don't. I think they're the same thing. It's just one we sort of ascribed ourselves. I think, right? I mean, or other people have used that term before. I don't know where you got it from, but I will just as a side tangent say I think what I'm learning in philosophy is that, or our discussions of philosophy, is that it's good to have the names for the same concepts that come up over and over, because otherwise we might find ourselves coming back to the same repeating patterns of thought. And once you like say, oh, that's the physicalist worldview or the realism school of thought, then you're like, oh, okay, so we've already been there. We know what it is.
Right.
And now we could like build on top of that.
Not reinventing the wheel.
Right. So that's just a side tangent of what I was thinking.
Okay.
But yeah.
But so when talking about the Big Bang, it seems to immediately open up a clear path logically to there are things that predate the Big Bang, and by things I don't mean physical things, because even if we want to say that the physical universe started at the Big Bang, it must be that this like simple cause and effect, right? Or
but before the Big Bang, there was no cause and effect because there was no time. Cause and effect requires
time.
Okay.
But okay, I think I'm okay. We're going somewhere. So the law of thermodynamics.
Okay.
You're saying that only came about at the start of the Big Bang, even though the Big Bang itself must have followed the law of thermodynamics, assuming it's a law, right?
I will say that our current understanding of the universe is not quite yet complete. So we still have these issues of quantum mechanics not being able to be reconciled, which is the science at a very large scale, at a very small scale of particles, and relativity, which is at the very large scale. They can't really be right. They can't be reconciled, and we have this. They're trying to come up in particle physics and in physics in general, theoretical physics. They've been trying to come up with this unified grand theory of everything that fits everything, including the Big Bang, because relativity and quantum mechanics do break down at the beginning of the Big Bang. So we understand everything that happened like up until 200, like from 200 microseconds after the Big Bang started, or something like that. Some very small amount of time, but not nothing. And so because within those first few microseconds, the universe looked completely different. Everything was like compact. It was just a small, I don't know, however, it was either enormous or tiny, depending on like the time frame you're exactly looking at. But just the physics of it is just so crazy, because the whole universe was compressed into this tiny, infinitesimal part of thing, and then it expanded suddenly. So just the law of thermodynamics, I don't know if we could say that it was from time zero. It was from time, I don't know, 1 second after the Big Bang or something.
Okay. I have to take a lot of things just kind of at face value here, or at least not try to delve into them too much because I'm out of my element a bit, more than a bit.
Well, you're in good company, because I think all scientists don't really understand.
Of course, yeah. Of course, we're talking about something very mysterious. But it's just, first of all, the Big Bang, it's clearly not an explanation, right? It's more of just a this is the way from a kind of physical observing point of view, right? If we just sort of put ourselves as a fly on the wall, even though there were no walls and there were no flies before the Big Bang, if we put ourselves like into reality, watching the Big Bang, the way the universe began was as this kind of explosion expanding from a single compact point. That doesn't really explain anything. Can we accept that? Like, it's kind of just more like as a matter of facts, or as a matter of it happened this way. Our best evidence says it happened this way. It doesn't explain anything from a more fundamental, fundamentally, okay, but why did that happen? How did that happen? It doesn't explain that. It's just more of a,
Well,
you know.
I think and we're going to talk about this more, what are explanations? Explanations exist in kind of a continuum. I think it's definitely an explanation. Maybe it's not as satisfying as you would like, or as deep as you would like. So, for example, when the classic game of why, that you play, that kids love to play, you say, why, I don't know, why are we making sushi? And because it's delicious. Why is it delicious? Because our taste buds evolved like this. Why do our taste buds evolve like this? Because it's important to distinguish sugars, blah, blah, blah. And then, but why? Because the universe began, because life began on Earth 4 billion years ago. Why? Because the universe expanded, blah, blah, blah. And eventually you get back to a point where you're like, but why?
Mm-hmm.
And you say, nobody knows. Or that's just how it is.
Yeah.
So the Big Bang theory definitely explains how everything got to its current place. It explains why the universe is 14 billion years old, why when we look further out, we see light, and we see galaxies that are just in their, forming at the beginning. So it explains a lot about what we see.
It's what's the word? It fits. It's consistent with other
Observations.
other observations that we make.
Yeah. But
which is good, yeah.
Right. So it's definitely an explanation for that. But you're saying
I don't even see. Hold on.
It doesn't explain why there was nothing and then there was something.
Yeah, we're using the word explanation possibly a little bit differently than each other, because I don't even think it really explains why you see galaxies far off in the universe that when you see them, you're seeing them just beginning. It's more just it's putting another puzzle piece in the model in order to make the model work. It's okay. So this is our best model so far based on the observations that we have. Okay, well that universe is still beginning when we see it, and we know that it's some billion light years away, and so a billion light years away it was just beginning, and so we put all these observations together, and we get to this part of the puzzle, and we're like, okay, well then the only thing that's consistent with that is that the universe, one, it had to begin. It wasn't always here, and it also had to begin from a small point because it's expanding. Because we're able to see that it's expanding, or that it was expanding.
Yeah. We see, exactly, galaxies expanding away from us, as if we're the center of the universe. But it must be that every other point is also that feels like the center of the universe. So everything expanded from everywhere, in whichever direction you look, and at the same rate.
Right, but my point is that it's not an explanation because it doesn't bring you out of the puzzle at all. It doesn't. It's all still within the puzzle. Like if you're playing a game of soccer and somebody stops playing and it's just like, wait, why are we playing this game? And somebody says, because we're trying to score so that we can beat the team. And you're like, but why are you trying to beat the team? And then you continue to give explanations within the game, like, if they do that, then they'll block the ball, and then you have to move over there. Like, you gotta, don't go off sides because the ref's gonna call it. And again, you're having two different conversations. You're trying to have this conversation of like, no, I'm not asking like how the mechanics work and how I can score and what's the best strategy to win. I'm asking like, why do we even do this at all? and the other person continues to just be inside the soccer game and not entertaining thoughts outside the soccer game. That's what the Big Bang Theory is doing.
Is there? So you're saying because like the theory exists within the universe and is limited to our knowledge of being within the universe, then it doesn't tell us anything about what's outside the universe, for example. But is there?
Correct.
So that's why you don't find it a satisfactory explanation, at least. But like, what would be an example of a good explanation that is external to some sort of action? And are you saying that this is like, no matter what theory we come up with, it's always going to suffer from this because we're always looking from inside the universe?
Any scientific explanation will suffer from the eternal why question, because you can always ask how did that. I'll amend it to the eternal how question, because why is not a scientific question so much. But how is better.
So this whole time, probably I'm right in assuming that you've been kind of referencing more of a metaphysical explanation to the universe, God, or some sort of prime mover. You've been alluding to that.
Well,
or you're just talking about personal issues with the Big Bang Theory.
Yes, the more the former than the latter.
Okay. So just so that our audience is clear as to what is your explanation, I guess.
Well, I don't have an explanation. I mean, I understand that God fills in a lot of things that make it easier to not have an explanation, because it is separate, the concept of a God creating the universe and a physical phenomenon that started the universe. The two things are extremely different in what they seek to explain. The physical phenomenon that started the universe, right? The Big Bang Theory, the Big Bang. It doesn't even seek to explain as much as the God hypothesis, because it's just a piece of the puzzle. It's just like, okay, well, in order to make all these observations consistent, that it just follows that something like the Big Bang must have occurred at the start of the universe. Where that leaves us with how that happened and what then encompasses the universe, like what exactly is the universe? Is it everything that started since the Big Bang, or is there more that was before the Big Bang? All those questions remain unanswered, and they should remain unanswered. It's a very honest and limited explanation to suggest the Big Bang. Suggesting that God created the universe is an attempt at doing much more, I will grant, and also acknowledging that this is a matter of faith, but I would also call it kind of like spiritual reasoning, or yeah, sure.
Okay, so we have the God theory. God created the universe instead of the universe just starting.
Yeah.
So what do we gain in that theory? What does that really help us understand about the universe? How is that a better explanation? And aren't you just left with the same questions? It's just a reductionist theory that just says, oh, God created everything, but then what created God? Oh, was God always there? So why can't we just say, there's nothing before God. God was just always there. So there's nothing before the universe. The universe just happened.
Well, okay. Even if I accept the equivalency you just brought up there, that okay, if I say God was always there, and then God created the universe, and you could say, well, nothing was before the Big Bang Theory, and then it just the Big Bang, and then it just happened. But there's a big difference there, because in the hypothesis of God, we hypothesize that he has the power to create universes. Whereas in the hypothesis of the Big Bang, it's that it just happened. But was there some cause? Was there something that has the power to create universes that create our universe? Could theoretically create another universe? Or it was very much just random? it's the randomness of it actually raises a lot of questions, right? It's very like, it just happened. Could it happen again? Could whatever in whatever way it occurred?
So it's about it possibly happening again.
It's about the because in the God hypothesis is that God is able to create the universe. So that's how he created the universe. So I accept that the God, hypothesizing God as a powerful or all-powerful being that has the power to create the universe, I accept that is not something that we can prove and demonstrate. But if that is the hypothesis, the start of the universe becomes much more natural. Because there's fewer questions about the start of the universe. Whereas,
Are there?
there's still, in terms of how it happened, I would say there are fewer. You can still ask why this universe, why is it the way it is? Why is there evil? You can ask all sorts of questions about the universe itself. But the how question, but wait, how did it start? Well, okay, it's because God created it.
But we're still left with all the same questions. Why did he just create it 14 billion years ago? Why did he wait? Why did he create it? In fact, the God hypothesis
it's not the same,
raises more questions.
It's not the same questions. There are many questions, but they're not the same questions. When you hypothesize that there's some...
Or how did God do it? How did God do it? I don't know. We just say he could, so he did. So it doesn't matter. Did he do it?
Yeah, because
with a
he
spell,
is
his hands.
Well, he is above the very universe. He's above the. He's not limited by the things that we are.
Okay, so before the Big Bang, it wasn't. There was nothing limited by the constraints of the universe because there was no universe or constraints.
Yeah, but in the Big Bang hypothesis, it doesn't hypothesize that there was any sort of decider or cause. It just happened, but that itself creates this gigantic gap of, well...
So how could it be that he waited 14... or he waited...
But that's a different question.
But it's not. It's not why. It's how.
Okay, how?
How could he... Not why as in some motivation, but how could he make it so that it only started 14 billion years ago? If he's omniscient, how is it possible, or omnipresent, which means he's omnipotent, but omnipresent means he's everywhere, always.
Okay, yeah.
Forever, like in time and space.
Yeah.
So then how could anything have not, how could he be limited to do it only 14 billion years ago? How can he limit himself to be, I don't know, to make the universe to wait? How could he limit himself to wait? I mean,
he waited. When was he waiting?
He waited at some point because the universe hasn't always existed. It's only existed 14 billion years.
But time didn't exist before the universe,
right?
So, in what sense was he waiting?
So then, in what sense was the universe not always there? According to the Big Bang Theory, in what sense do we need something to come before?
Well, there's a difference between the Big Bang Theory does state that the universe had a beginning. It wasn't always there, even though there wasn't time before. Because we can accept that there was a state before the universe, even though there was no time in that state.
Does it make sense to even talk about it as a state?
And also, how can we say it was before?
Yeah.
If time didn't exist. It was causatively before.
Even though causation didn't exist.
I'm not sure that we can say that. That's a tough one. Can we say that causation didn't even exist? There's no such thing as one thing causing another. Then nothing could have caused the Big Bang. It doesn't really make sense to say that causation didn't exist before the Big Bang.
I think we could all agree that nothing really makes sense about what came before.
All I was saying about the explanation bit was that the Big Bang is not it's a very different kind of explanation than God as an explanation. And I'm not saying that God is grounded in more evidence than the Big Bang. I'm just saying that they're two very, very different kinds of explanations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
We'll leave it to our listeners to decide which one they like. Okay, so that was a bit on astronomy, the Big Bang Theory, physics.
Mhm.
So we were talking about branches of science, engineering. There's often in these fields you have applied and research. So research is actual science. It's using the scientific method. It's coming up with hypotheses to try to develop something new, to test something, you have a problem and you want to solve it. And applied is more, you have a problem, we already know how to solve this in the literature, you just have to apply the solution. So in that aspect, in that sense, there are parts of engineering that are, in my opinion, not science. They reference scientific knowledge that was derived through the scientific method, but they just apply it.
Mm.
Then there are the social sciences. Those study human behavior in societies, psychology, sociology, and economics. And they often use the scientific method to arrive at certain results. They take a bunch of subjects, participants in a study. They have a hypothesis that they will, if you put them all alone on an island, they'll start killing each other. Or the Stanford prison experiment, they'll start, if you have two groups of people, one will, and you give one authority over the other, then they'll start abusing the power of it or something. That's the hypothesis. You take people, you try to, isolate as many variables as possible so that there's no external influences. And then you test your hypothesis and analyze the results. However, they don't provide universal laws like physics does. Atoms are always going to behave like atoms. Chemicals, materials, and genetics, in a way, will always behave that way. But humans undergo change, cultural change, and the effects of, the results of studies might have effects on future studies. So a lot of people, for example, there's the experiment where, I forget what it was called, but they would have people listen to a subject in another room and say, they're trying to help them learn something, and every time they get an answer wrong, the tester told the participant, the tester who was running the experiment told the participant, deliver an electric shock to this guy in the other room so that, he knows that he got his answer wrong. And so he could hear him through his microphone. He hears him say out, and then the tester slowly asks him to increase the voltage, and the participant says, okay, are you sure? But does it anyways. He says, yes, do it, until eventually the subject is screaming in pain and then just dies. So from the participant's point of view, he thinks he's killed the guy in the other room. And this was a very controversial experiment.
I wonder why.
They used it to explain why people, for example, in World War II, became comfortable with such crazy things, concentration camp, death camps, just killing lots of people, and just watching it because of authority, because of the slow increase towards things getting worse and worse.
Wait. There wasn't actually a person being electrocuted?
Yeah, disclaimer. They didn't actually kill someone.
Okay.
It was just.
Nor was there even anybody there being electrocuted.
Yeah, it was just a recording, but the participant didn't know that.
I see. The participant thought that they had killed somebody.
Yeah, because it wouldn't pass an ethical board, which is required for a lot of these experiments, if someone was actually getting electrocuted.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is, nowadays, this is such a famous study that if someone signed you up to this, you would know, or a lot of people would know, oh, I know this experiment. And then they'd be like, haha, I'm just going to, go straight to the highest voltage, or just be like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do it, because they know what the experiment's trying to show. So that's why a lot of these earlier studies, also before there were ethical boards to clear these sort of things, it was easier to conduct such tests. But Yeah, the point is that they don't provide universal laws. Humans are too complex for that as well, and it has this feedback.
Yeah, there's
effect.
a self-awareness challenge here, because it'd be like if the atoms were self-aware and you were experimenting on them, but then they understood the results of your experiment, so then they are now inclined to change those results or to behave in a different way in order to get a different result or something. Meaning, when you test something, it has to be unaware that you're testing it, in order to actually get an honest result. Whereas with humans, that's often hard to accomplish, it seems.
Which is an interesting effect, I think. I'm not such an expert on this, as a disclaimer, but there is an issue when trying to observe atoms and quantum mechanics, because our methods of observation
change the
they change what you're going to see, but the way that you see anything is by sending photons at electrons, having them bounce back at you. But the very act of sending a photon will affect the state of the atom. Have it collapse to one wavelength or something.
This is what Schrodinger's cat addresses, isn't it? Yeah.
And just the fact that however you measure it, you're going to be using something physical, some apparatus that's physical, uses atoms, electrons, photons. If you want to use a physical apparatus to understand the fundamental physical laws of the universe, you're going to run into this feedback issue as well.
That's wild. But the other question I had was, are there no universal laws of psychology?
Well, there are. Laws would mean that they're never violated, usually. So I don't know the word for patterns. There are human patterns.
There are patterns.
Power does corrupt. Authority does push you to do things, regardless of the deferring to authority. It's a phenomenon. There are phenomenons that are common and patterns that repeat. That if someone else could take the blame, there are principles. I'd say maybe principles is less rigid than laws, but there's all sorts of you read any Malcolm Gladwell's Blink or Thinking Fast and Slow.
Right. There's plenty of literature on human psychology, that's for sure.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples in psychology is from Daniel Kahneman's Fast and Slow. There's also Dan Ariely, another Israeli psychologist.
Although he was discredited.
Was he?
Wasn't he?
I don't know. That's not as far as I know.
That's what I thought. Certainly some of his experiments I heard were kind of shown that they weren't so authentic. That
very possible.
Putting the cart before the horse sort of thing. I think.
So I mean it's also a little bit inevitable in these fields. It's a bit of a softer science, as they say, because humans are just not as predictable as atoms. And yes, I don't know. Maybe this you're not dealing with complete results. You have to interpret them a lot more. Your results might be 40% of the population did this, 60% of the population did this. Oh, that's significant enough or something. Usually there is a value, a mathematical value of what a significant result would be. But all of these things are still subject to some sort of human interpretation, which is something that I want to come back to again, because it's going to come back with the revolutions and things. But that example I want to show you was if you have a baseball bat and a baseball, and together they cost $1.10, and the baseball bat is $1 more than the baseball, how much does each cost?
You have a baseball and a baseball bat. Together they cost $1.10.
Yeah.
the baseball bat costs $1 more than the baseball. Very
Yeah.
very cheap baseball and baseball bat.
Yeah.
10,
It's a simple.
10 cent. Yeah. Nice,
No.
nice,
Well,
nice.
it's a simple question.
Well, I've heard it before, and I still tripped up.
No, but what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say 10 cents and $1,
Uh-huh.
but that wouldn't be $1 more. Right, 5 cents and $1, 5 cents.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, most people would just like immediately say $1.10, and even being able to catch yourself is impressive.
Well, I know I heard that one before.
Right. Okay. So, but that's the thing. I've also heard that so many times, or I just, it's one of my favorite examples. So it's not going to work on me.
Mhm.
There's the think of a tool and a color, and most people say red. Yeah.
Well, now you just gave away red.
Okay.
I was thinking hammer.
Okay.
Is the hammer the tool I'm supposed to
Yeah.
be thinking of? Before you said red, I don't know if I was thinking red. It's hard now to.
Yeah.
It was so quick.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I ruined that one, but that's the issue. And then you have formal sciences. So we said natural sciences, social sciences, formal sciences. That's when you study logic, mathematics, computer science, which we both happen to have degrees in. And although it's computer science, to me, these things don't necessarily use the scientific method. They're logical deductions. That's what it all comes back down to. And I think we'll get more into this in future episodes.
Really?
Well, if we do one on math.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
There's a little teaser trailer for you.
But it's worth talking about now. It's worth
Okay.
talking now about whether computer science is science.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you have a problem, if you want to use the scientific method to approach a problem, then yes, that would be science. If you have to, you want to figure out how to classify images of cats versus dogs into their respective categories.
Sorry, I was thinking about a few things there. What was the first thing you said that you said was science?
Using the scientific method. So if you have a problem and you're told come up with a solution to this, if you just go and apply some solution that's in the literature that says, you read an article on Medium and that says, this is how to do it,
Mhm.
then fine. But if you have to, implement it yourself, find it doesn't work, and then say, I have a hypothesis that if I adjust these hyperparameters, if I set the learning rate to be lower, increase the number of layers in the neural network, then it will learn better. You test that, and if it doesn't work, then you've now disproven your hypothesis. Boom, you've used the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just coding a function that, like if you're supposed to code a function that calculates the factorial, which is one number times all the numbers that came before it, I don't see anything scientific there. I think everyone knows how that's done, and if you want to optimize it, fine, to be faster in a way that requires you to run it, test it, compare between runtimes, then that's using the scientific method. But if you're just applying it, then you're just applying it, so it's not.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little different from math as well, but I'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, well, even in math, there's applied math where you're not
Yeah.
really doing science anymore. You're just
Using a calculator.
or accounting uses math. It's not. It's using the discoveries or the knowledge that the science develops or discovered, and using that for practical purposes. So yeah, I that's not exactly science. It's applying science. So there's a lot of that in programming as well.
Mm-hmm. We should discuss what deduction is in brief. But deduction, which we've probably mentioned before, but you have premises and you have a conclusion, and the conclusion necessarily follows from these premises. For example, all swans are white. I see a swan, therefore that swan must be white.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I see maybe it's I hear a swan or something. So whatever swan I'm hearing must be white.
Mm-hmm.
That's a deductive argument because there's just no other way to interpret the premises that would not entail that conclusion. And if it happens to be that the swan that you found is black, then that means that your premises are wrong. But that doesn't mean that the conclusion wasn't rational and logical. It was completely rational and logical. It was just your premises were wrong.
Yeah.
Not all swans are white.
Yeah. I liked hearing somebody explain it once that when it comes to deduction, because the conclusion follows from the premises, it's helpful to not even think of it as like a bunch of premises and then we came to a conclusion, as if there's any doubt about this conclusion, as if this is like an argument. No, the conclusion itself is like part of the premises now. It's like it all just is so logically tight. It just fits together. It is just so true, all those things together, that the conclusion is only our perception of it. Because we didn't see the conclusion immediately, and we had to kind of like look closely at the premises in order to pick out the conclusion that we were trying to pick out, we can kind of like separate it and say, oh, this is the conclusion. But it was always there, embedded in that, because the logic says that it is true.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it still makes sense though to view it as a conclusion, I think, because but I get your point. But it's very important to still differentiate conclusions because that's how the body of math is formed through all of these logical steps and arguments. So in math, you have all of these axioms, and then from there, you have 10 central axioms. From there, everything is derived. You have, set theory or the axiom of choice.
What's the axiom of choice?
It's a controversial one, and we'll talk more about it in the math episode. But a simpler axiom would be just like the axiom of counting, which is that numbers, you could count numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they increase. Like, it's so basic that it barely even means anything, but it's important.
Huh. Okay.
Like the axiom of just when you take two numbers, you can add them to get a third number.
Mm-hmm.
That's how basic it is.
Mm-hmm.
But from there, we could create this chain of logic that gets to more complicated formulas, and Pythagorean theorem or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that just or let's say the square root of 2 is irrational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a good one. Do you remember the proof for that? So the deductive proof.
Oh boy.
It's something along the lines of the square root so an irrational number is a number that just repeats in decimal points but never repeats the same. Sorry, it just continues to go on in decimal points but never repeats the same digits. So 1 is rational because it's 1.000, it repeats, and 3.33333 is
yeah, well, I think it can repeat.
It could repeat. No, irrational can't repeat the numbers after the decimal, or any numbers.
It can't even repeat once?
No, it could repeat digits. Okay, it could repeat once. If you have 137, but then 127.
Okay, yeah.
In the decimal places, then it could still be irrational.
Okay, I think there's maybe a simpler way to explain it, which is that an irrational number cannot be represented by a fraction.
Yes, well, it's simpler because it's shorter.
Why is it not
It's
simpler?
not necessarily more intuitive.
Okay.
Why can't it be represented as a fraction? Because if you have a repeating number, then you could just take that section that repeats over and over and put that over, like if you have 0.1367, 1367, 1367.
Okay.
Then you could just put that 1,367 over 10,000 and multiplied by another rational number that we know repeats over and over, like 0.111111 or 0.10001, which is 10,000 over 100,000 or something. And then you multiply the two, and then you get your original rational number.
If you say so. I didn't
I remember learning that in calculus. But
oh wait, so the square root of 2 being irrational.
Yeah.
I actually think I might remember. Do you remember the proof?
It's either rational or no, it has to do with either it's even or odd. But we could also look it up, unless you
don't look it up.
Okay.
The square root of 2. So it's going to be a proof by contradiction. Okay, what is that? It means that you assume that the conclusion is not true, and then run into a contradiction. And because there are no contradictions in logic and math, it must be that your assumption that the conclusion is not true is itself not true, so the conclusion must be true. So to prove that the square root of 2 is irrational, we're going to assume that the square root of 2 is rational. And I hope I don't get stuck in the middle, because I might. But if the square root of 2 is rational, then it can be represented by a fraction. And let's call it p over q. So the p is the numerator, the q is the denominator. So p over q is the square root of 2 in our proof so far. And then, if we were to square both sides, because it's an equation, so we can square both sides and it'll still be an equation. So
the top and the bottom of the fraction.
Yeah, as well as the left side, which is the square root of 2. So now we have 2 equals p squared over q squared. And then we multiply by q squared. So we have 2q squared equals p squared. Why is that important? Because
but we have 2 squared, which is 4 times q.
We have 2q squared. 2 times q squared equals p squared.
Yeah.
So what that means is that I know I'm close now. It's just a matter of ending it, of getting the final. It's what we're trying to get
solution.
to. What we're trying to get to is show
either
that
p. Yeah. Okay. Fine.
We're trying to get to show that our assumption has actually. Oh, okay. Sorry. So I have to go back. When we said that p over q represents the square root of 2, we're assuming that that is a reduced fraction. And we're allowed to do that because if the square root of 2 is a rational number, which means that there is a fraction that represents the square root of 2, then there is some fraction that is the reduced fraction. That means that you can't reduce it further, right? So like 6 over 9 is not the most reduced fraction because you can make that
2 over 3.
2 over 3, exactly. So the p over q represents the most reduced fraction that is the square root of 2. And what I am failing to do, but what the proof eventually does, is show that if that is true, then we can, get 2q squared equals p squared, and then form another fraction that is more reduced than p over q. It basically shows that there must be two other numbers that are smaller and equal p over q, and they're both smaller, so it's more reduced. But this contradicted our assumption that p over q is the most reduced fraction. And then you might say, okay, fine, well then that's the most reduced fraction. Well then I can do the same thing, and I can do it again, and show that there's an infinite number of reducible fractions here, which is impossible if there is truly a fraction that exists.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I remember it also as like, because 2q is an even number, and so p is either even, but we could also show that it can't be even, and it can't be odd. So therefore, it just can't exist.
It's
something like that. But the basic point is that what we just did, that proof is nothing like scientific, like the scientific method. There's no hypothesis. The hypothesis could be that like the square root of 2 is irrational, but the way that we test it is not by going out into the physical world and trying to prove it wrong. It's by using argumentative logic to show, to build an argument purely in our minds that this just can't exist logically.
Okay.
Okay, maybe you want to refine that a bit.
I actually want to reject it.
Okay, you're going to say that it is science because we've tested it.
I think that it is science. And I also think that you can form some very striking similarities between the science of creating proofs and the science of doing experiments in a more physical sense. Because, right, there was a hypothesis in the mathematical world for a while that there are no irrational numbers. Rather, they didn't phrase it that way. They just didn't think of irrational numbers. They just, every number, there are numbers, and then there can be fractions. Of course, fractions themselves took a little bit of time to come up with. But anyway, so when they had numbers, then they had fractions. And the concept of a number that could exist but couldn't be represented as a fraction, that didn't make sense to people. That wasn't something that people had discovered yet. So there was a hypothesis that this thing doesn't exist, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. So
they also didn't believe in zero or infinity, other concepts. But
these were developed at different points in time, I think. But so when it came to the square root of 2, right? People said, okay, so the square root is, the number that if you multiply it by itself, you get to that number. So there's a square root of every number because it's an operation. You can apply it on any number and you get some other value. So there's a square root of 2. There's a number that if you multiply it by itself, it gets to be 2. And there's a hypothesis among the body of work of mathematicians that, well, of course, this number can be represented as a fraction because every number can be represented as a fraction. And then somebody comes along and says, let's test that hypothesis. Let's actually test whether the number that if you multiply it by itself and you get to 2 can be represented as a fraction. So far, this is all very scientific, right? And so the laboratory, then, the experiment, is an experiment in the mind, but it's still very much an experiment. It's not subjective in the sense that in the way other things that exist in the mind are subjective, because it has to follow very strict rules. The same way your experiments in the lab follow rules, and of course there are the laws of physics that contain the experiments as well. And so, even though the mind is in a way more free than our experiments in the lab, but we're choosing to constrict our minds into the rules of logic and the rules of math. And so there's a hypothesis here of the square root of 2 is rational, or maybe the hypothesis is the square root of 2 is irrational. And the testing is the proof creation, is the attempt to go, try to analyze the logic of it. We dealt with writing proofs in college a bit. Since then, I haven't done it at all. But you read up on mathematicians and writing proofs, and it can be a very difficult process. But it's a process that is very much like building an experiment, or the process itself of trying to find the proof is itself an experiment, in the sense that, well, if I find the proof, then I can know that it's true, and if I don't find the proof, then maybe it's not true. So same way, right? The falsifiability is in if I can find the proof that proves it false or proves a particular hypothesis true. And the failure to falsify is when I don't find the proof. Like there are many things in math that people still think are probably true, but haven't found a proof yet, so it hasn't been falsified. Or its negation hasn't been falsified.
Okay. I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
I still think that there are differences.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the two differences that I'm about to say might be a little contradicting with each other.
Okay.
But so I haven't fully concretized it yet. But the first difference is using logical deduction, you can come up with conclusions that might contradict reality, given that your premises are incorrect.
Okay.
So, if you're premises, just something crazy like all swans are white, and then all dogs are black, and everything exists in either only those two colors. And then I see, if I see something, a human, or if I see a bird and he is white, then I conclude that he's a swan. Or if I see a kangaroo and he's white, then I conclude that he's a swan, because in my premises, I assumed that everything is either a swan or a dog. Those are the only two colors that exist, either black or white.
So not only that all swans are white, but that all white things are swans.
Things are swans. Yeah, exactly. So that's a valid conclusion, but it's clearly not true.
Right.
Because my premises are just incorrect.
Right.
So using formal logic to arrive at a conclusion in the lab of your mind doesn't mean that it's going to exist in nature.
Well, if your starting points, if the premises of your conclusion are true, and you're saying, well, yeah, that's the point, but you're not just coming up with your own premises. You're using the premises that have been established as true.
Right, but it could be that the premises themselves in science will be found to be false. So if you come up with a conclusion that doesn't fit, that contradicts any existing premises, it's not that your conclusion must be false and therefore whatever you saw is incorrect. It's that your premises themselves are now being challenged. You can't really challenge in the same way the premises in formal logic, because they're just taken for granted. The axioms of math are taken for granted. You can, there are examples in math where the fundamental axioms themselves are challenged. That's the Gödel's incompleteness theorem or something.
Well, I don't know does that challenge a fundamental axiom?
Yeah.
Which one? Or how?
It's like, okay.
We should probably explain what Gödel's incompleteness theorem is.
Well, I do want to save some things for the math episode.
But it's free flowing
in brief. In brief, and I do want to get back on topic a bit to scientific revolutions.
Okay.
It's relevant because, these things, the point is that they challenge our previous assumptions in scientific revolutions. Our whole framework is challenged. There were some things like that in math, for example, set theory. There's this where everything can be broken down into sets. That's one of the axioms of math, that everything, numbers are not just quantities, but everything is actually just like a set, and the cardinality of a set is what a number is. So like how many objects are in that set is what a number is. And then you could combine sets, you can get the union of sets, and from there derive mathematical operations. So the question is, what is the set that contains itself? Is that a set or not a set? It's like
we're getting to Russell's paradox.
Yeah.
Which maybe we should explain what that is. Which we mentioned before.
Right.
But
still think we should save it for the math episode. But it's like the barber in the town cuts everyone's hair who doesn't cut their own hair. So if he cuts his own hair, then he doesn't cut everyone that doesn't cut their own hair. And if he doesn't cut his own hair, then he should be cutting his own hair, because he should be cutting everyone who doesn't cut their own hair.
Back up so that's clear. There's a barber in town. Anyone who doesn't cut their own hair, this barber will cut their hair.
Yeah.
Anyone who cuts their own hair and doesn't get cut by the barber. So now the question is, does the barber cut his own hair?
Yeah.
Well, if the barber cuts his own hair, then he doesn't cut his hair. He doesn't cut his own hair because he cuts his own hair. And if he doesn't cut his own, only if he doesn't cut his own hair does he cut his own hair. We run into a contradiction.
Right. And the set of everything, does it contain itself? If it contains itself, then it...
So
The point is there are these contradictions that do challenge the fundamental axioms, but they're not central to math. In math, they are central. They're extremely central, but they don't.
I need to say something about Russell's paradox, and I don't have an answer.
We can't wait till the next episode. Yes.
Well, because we're
yeah. Got it.
So I don't have an answer like this to every possible contradiction that comes up in math, but Russell's paradox is, I think, a good example of yes, we reached something that was nonsensical. We reached a contradiction. Russell rather reached the contradiction, but it's a good example of showing that we reached that contradiction because our premises were flawed, or at least the way we were modeling this was flawed. We reached a contradiction because our way of thinking wasn't a proper reflection of reality. Because there's something nonsensical about the very assumption that a set can contain itself. We were running with that for the purpose of math. We were like, yeah, this seems to work. So we were running with it until we got to the contradiction and we're like, oh, it doesn't work. Because yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. Let's say I have a set. It contains an apple, an orange, and also it contains itself. But what is it that it contains? The apple, the orange, and what? Itself. But the itself is what? The apple, the orange, and itself. But what is itself? The apple, the orange, and what? You never can answer the question about what the set even is if it contains itself.
It's an infinite recursion.
Exactly. You've never established a baseline of what the set actually contains. It always contains the apple, the orange, and itself. And that thing itself is the apple, the orange, and itself. It doesn't make sense as a concept. That's why it forms a contradiction.
But infinity can exist even though, as a concept, even though what is infinity? It's whatever is bigger than the largest thing you could think of. Okay, what's bigger than the largest thing I can think of? Oh, it's even bigger than that. And it's even bigger than the largest. It's even bigger than the largest thing I could think of. Bigger than bigger than bigger than bigger.
This is not the same thing at all. Infinity does exist even in reality. Assuming
as a concept.
Well,
that's my point.
But
so too can infinitely recursive things exist as long as they converge.
Well, the infinitely
or even if they don't converge, they can exist as concepts, just not in the real world.
No.
Which is also why it's not a scientific.
Hold on, suggesting
pursuit because it has to exist in the real world.
It sounds like you're suggesting that infinite recursion is valid because infinity exists. If infinity exists, then infinite recursion exists. Is that what you're saying?
All right, you've caught me in a slightly self-referencing argument.
Have I?
Circular argument. Well, because I said infinity exists since infinite recursion exists. But that's relying on the fact that infinity exists. So it's a circular argument.
That's not really.
That wasn't your point.
That wasn't my point. I thought you were just saying that. Meaning, what I was explaining with the idea of a set containing itself and why that doesn't make sense, and you're saying, well, it's infinite recursion, which is fine. There's infinity exists, right? But no, those two things are not the same. Infinity and infinite recursion are very different. Infinite recursion is not a problem because of infinity. It's simply a problem because it's never defined what the thing is. And the infinite is just there because the point is we never get to where we need to get to. We never get to what like in programming, you can't have infinite recursion in a function. The function doesn't do anything if it infinitely recurses because it's never defined what the function actually does. Only if you have a base case can the function actually do anything, because then each recursive case is built on the base case. But if there's no base case, I'm sorry if nobody understands what I'm saying right now.
It'll be in the next episode.
If there's no base case, it's never defined what the function even does. Same thing with a set that contains itself. It's never defined what the set even is, what the set contains. Infinity as a concept on its own, though, is totally valid. It doesn't. It's apples and oranges here.
All right. And sets of apples and oranges. When it comes to science, so back to science, it uses a way of thinking called induction.
Wow,
induction...
back to science. Wow, we're leaving math to go to induction here. Let's stop talking about math.
Math, which isn't a science, according to Benjy.
Uh-huh.
to go to
Induction,
induction
which
in
is
science.
a part of science. Okay.
So, but yeah, we will definitely discuss this in the next episode. Is math a science?
Okay.
Induction is a way of looking at the world as if something is always happening, then it's likely to keep happening. So, if the sun rises every day, then the inductive argument is that it's going to rise tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a bit different from mathematical induction. Very well.
Deduction.
This is a bit different from mathematical induction.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there's also a concept in mathematical induction
Mhm.
called induction in math. Not that. But I'm trying to compare induction versus deduction. So
Okay.
deduction, you start with the premises, you form the conclusion, which must come about because of the premises. As Cal said, we could even just ignore the conclusion because it's just so ingrained in the premises. In induction, the argument is in the premises, instead of all swans are white or something, it's the sun has risen today. It's risen the past, 4.2 billion years or whatever, 5,000 years since we've been keeping track.
Okay.
So it makes sense that it'll rise tomorrow. If I drop this object, it'll fall because everything in my life experience has shown that this object will fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we want, we can create, this theory that objects drop when they fall. And then derive all sorts of laws from there, all sorts of theories, Newton's law of gravity and everything. But it comes back always to fundamental inductive arguments that aren't axioms in the same way. I mean, they are axioms because our axiom is things will fall when dropped.
Mm-hmm.
But we know this inductively.
Okay. Because we've seen it before.
Yeah.
And we've never seen it not happen.
Right. I guess it's the common problem with axioms, even in math. At some point, you have to stop asking why and just take it as is. But we definitely use inductive arguments way more in science to base everything off of than deductive arguments. Because in math, for example, if you have a function if you have a series that goes 1, 2, 4, 8, or whatever we said, it's not necessarily true that, if you think just because it's doubled every time for every element in the series, that the next number will also be the doubled amount. There could be a different law that these numbers can follow. And there are such series and functions, and we could discuss them later. There's an infinite amount of them probably, but there are common ones as well that it seems to follow this pattern, and then all of a sudden it changes. But because it's just following a more complex function underneath. Mm-hmm. So, whereas in science, when we're, analyzing genetics or biology or chemistry, the idea that when I'm going to mix these two chemicals, I know from previous experience that they're going to explode when I mix them.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just know from previous experience that when I turn on my car, it's not going to explode. But there still is a leap of faith here in a way. And as we understand more about the chemical processes that happen underneath it all, then we understand, we have these theories that will give us even more faith or just concretize our idea of what's going to happen. So when I mix these two chemicals, I either know that they won't explode because I know the theory of what's going on behind the scenes with these chemicals.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say induction, I think, is used more often by regular people than deduction. Most people, I think, run off of just what they've seen before. Like, why do people get on a plane and trust that they'll get there safely? You might say, well, because they trust the experts and the technicians and the science of aerodynamics and all that stuff. And I think that it's not really that, because I think most people don't understand that well enough at all to be able to say, oh yeah, the science of aerodynamics. It's because thousands of people get on planes every day, and the vast majority of the time we don't hear about something happening. And a given individual, every time they got on a plane, they got there safely. And this is just, they've seen enough to just feel like inductively, okay, the next time I get on a plane, it's probably going to be fine. They're not thinking about like the science of plane travel or even really trusting in the experts. I think they're just thinking inductively.
Yeah, and that's also what happens in the Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode. At the end, he argues, you just take what people say, on these scientists, what they say on faith. Well, yeah, because he hasn't looked through the figures himself, but he knows that scientists usually know what they're talking about. They've usually gone through this experience of being tested and criticized, or they have to be educated to think critically. So his inductive reasoning is that he will take their word for it because they seem to know what they're talking about. It is ultimately a faulty, it could be a faulty reasoning. It's just better than anything we have because we don't have a way to really do deduction for everything. But, a classic example is, why wear a seatbelt if you've never been in an accident? You never needed one until now. So, maybe you don't need one. But if you truly understand what's happening behind the scenes, then you'll know that, it's a matter of probability. Okay, maybe you will never truly need one, but there's a slight chance that you will, and then therefore the cost versus reward.
Well, there I think you just have to expand the induction, right? If somebody just thinks about themselves, assuming they've never been in an accident, right, you might be tempted to say, oh, I don't need a seatbelt, I've never been in an accident. But why do we know that is pretty bad reasoning? Is because there's no reason to just look at your own experience in your inductive reasoning. Car accidents are things that happen, right? You know of other people who have been in accidents. You've heard about it happening. So even in your inductive reasoning, you do see that they happen. If it was the case that they never happened and that no one had even heard of it happening for anybody else, then more people would not wear a seatbelt, even if you told them, hey, but theoretically it could happen. Well, if you've never seen it happen even to other people or even heard about it happening in the news, then people might be less persuaded to wear a seatbelt.
Okay. So you're saying because you can imagine or you've heard of other people that it's actually happened to.
Yeah.
That it increases the likelihood.
I'm just expanding the data set.
You're expanding the data set. Which, all of a sudden, yeah, you can't apply inductive reasoning because now your reasoning isn't that I've never been in an accident, so I don't need one. It's sometimes there are accidents, sometimes there aren't, and therefore it's not. Inductive reasoning can't be applied there because inductive reasoning kind of requires a consistent. It does require a consistent a data set where everything happened before that in a specific way. So I would say, yeah, we're still, I guess I see the distinction there, and that because we've never dropped an object and had it fall up, then that's a different data. Like there is no data set, I guess, where objects have fallen up. But we could kind of imagine it. We could kind of I don't know,
Well, what does imagining it have to do with anything?
because that means that it could exist in theory, maybe. We just have to, I don't know, expand your data set to say, well, sometimes you just have to be more creative about what the possibilities are. Like, if you meet someone that says all swans are black or all swans are white, I guess it's more common that swans are white,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, yeah, all swans are white, you would say, okay, you've never seen a black swan? Nope. I don't know anyone that had. Let's say they, grew up somewhere where they never saw a black swan, which is most of us.
Okay.
But I would say it's a lack of imagination that would bring someone to conclude that such a radical idea.
But isn't the point of induction that we are having a lack of imagination? That's when we do induction, we're trying to imagine to not imagine. We're trying to imagine as little as possible. We're trying to say, okay, what I have seen so far, I'm just going to assume that that's going to be the way it is until I'm proven wrong, I guess. But I'm not going to start speculating about like, oh, well, maybe the sun won't rise tomorrow. Maybe things will fall up. Like if I've seen it happen every time, I'm going to assume it happens again.
Well, if you want to lead a reasonable life where you're not questioning everything like crazy, then yeah, that's what you want to do. But if you're a scientist who's using the scientific method, you're supposed to consider all other explanations, other possibilities. Otherwise, you'll be stuck. Just imagine if you say, I don't want to consider anything that I've never seen before, then you'll never progress.
Well, but now I thought the whole point of introducing the inductive reasoning as reasoning in science is to say that it's not perfect, right? It's
no, it's definitely not perfect.
okay, but it is still something that works a lot of the time.
Yes,
and inductively, perhaps we should consider using it because
Which
it's worked before.
Which is one of the arguments against induction, which is a little confusing.
Okay.
But you have people that say, hey, induction is not reliable. You can't just depend on what's happened. Sorry, maybe it's the opposite. Is that you can't just depend on what's happening. So what do you say to them? Well, it's been successful in the past, but that itself is an inductive argument.
Yeah.
So you can't use induction to justify the use of induction.
Okay.
And
if you don't do that, then can you justify induction?
no, not without using induction.
But as I said, I think everyone uses induction.
Right.
Yeah.
And if everyone's jumping off a cliff.
Well, well, here, let me understand. When do we actually see induction in science? Like in the current scientific body of knowledge, what is reliant on induction that we are assuming to be true, but it's reliant on induction? Is that do we know of anything? I'm just asking if you have anything on hand, because I don't.
Well, for example, okay, the simplest example is just objects falling.
But objects falling is not reliant on induction. We can use it as an example of hypothetically somebody using.
No, it is. That two objects will attract each other due to gravity is inductive.
Because the law of universal gravitation is just based on.
Well, the law is just based off of what we've
observed.
The theory of relativity actually gives more of a deeper explanation about why two things should necessarily attract each other.
Okay.
But my point is more that when you have previous scientific revolutions or scientific thoughts that come before a revolution, so when you have Newton that says, "Oh, my theory works. I'm able to help, England and build trebuchets and and because they follow my laws of parabolic motion. And then Einstein comes along and says, actually, you know what you thought is wrong. It doesn't actually work like that. And then Newton says, but wait, every time I used it so far, it does. But it was actually wrong because under extreme circumstances, like high speeds and low scale, it doesn't. So he used induction because he said, oh, this works. But if he went to the extremes, he would see that it doesn't actually work.
Well, okay. But if we're going to say that all scientific laws are really just induction, because we've seen it happen that way, and so then they become laws, then...
And we said laws are like consistent observations.
Right.
And theories are more of a deeper explanation. Okay.
But even the deeper explanation still seems to me that there's some induction there. It's deeper relative to the first thing, but then we can go into the explanation itself and say, well, why does that happen? And it's induction. It's because that's how we've observed it happening over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that induction is, if you're going to say that replicability means something in science, or even just that observability, if you're able to set up an experiment and observe something happen, if that means anything, and if replicating it means anything, which we have established as like fundamental parts of science. Without those things, science just can't get off the ground. It doesn't even work. You have to assume something to start. Then induction simply follows from that. Induction is simply
everywhere.
It's simply observation and replication.
Right.
So induction seems to me to be getting not enough credit from this conversation. It's being framed as a slightly faulty methodology that science uses. But on the contrary, it seems to me to be the fundamental methodology that science uses. And if it's not valid, then science itself is impossible.
Right. So I'm not saying, just to clarify to all those fans of induction out there.
Okay.
Yes, I agree. It is the most fundamental concept in science. Sometimes I will say, I will list pitfalls of certain aspects of things, not to cast doubt on them, but just to show their limitations. Similarly, with the whole discussion on science, I'm a big fan of science, in case it wasn't clear. I think it is critical.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think it's very important to discuss its limitations, because I think people take it too far sometimes.
For sure.
So when it comes to induction, it is central in a way that we don't see in math.
Wait,
but
induction is central to science, but it's not central to math?
In the same way. Not that I want to go back there.
Okay.
But, okay, well, it's food for thought. But there is this
just one point. In math, mathematical induction is not just a methodology that we rely on. It's 100%.
But it's different.
100%
it's a different
valid.
type of induction.
It's a different type of induction, absolutely. The inductive step has to be logically sound. You have to be able to mathematically prove the inductive step, which we'll get to in the math.
It's a different thing. It's
it's very similar, but it's in mathematical induction is 100% valid. It's not just something that we rely on pragmatically.
Okay. Good. It's out there. Just in case someone was about to doubt it in the podcast. No, it's good. It's good.
It's important to distinguish that. Moving on.
So one last comment on that. There's a lot of philosophers of science. One of them is David Hume, is pretty fundamental, and he talks about induction, and one of the assumptions that we make is the uniformity of nature, that when we look to one place in the universe, we assume that the laws of nature that exist over there are going to be the same ones here. Maybe we would think, oh, gravity is different over there, or chemicals, elements react differently
Like,
when I look into the Andromeda Galaxy or something.
well, gravity is different in the Andromeda Galaxy, but it's
Well, universal gravity we assume is the same.
Is the same. Okay, it's different because the masses are different, and that is
Right.
already included in the law of universal gravity.
But the gravity per unit of mass, we assume is the same.
Okay.
Even though there are certain issues a little bit with that. On Earth, the scale of everything is so small, and that we just figure, like obviously an airplane is going to work the same here as it does there, and we see in experiments
there being some other place on Earth.
Yeah. And we see experimentally that this works, and it's very successful. But there are possibly reasons to think, that maybe things do work differently when they're, in a very far away part of the universe from us. There's issues with like dark matter and dark energy where things are like accelerating away from us at a faster rate than they should be. Then we like posit that there's maybe dark mass there, which is something that can't be observed but is there, but then we haven't found any evidence for it. And
other than the evidence that inspired
Right.
inspired the hypothesis that it exists.
Mm-hmm. And it's just the case for it has been getting harder and harder. And it's just that maybe this it's part of it's at the fringes of science that we don't know things about the universe at these scales and in these distances, that maybe there is something that we haven't figured out yet, and that it behaves differently there. I don't know. Maybe the induction does fall apart at the extremes. But in general, induction is very useful.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
So at this point, I think we should do a little bit more about describing science, as we've been doing this whole time.
Okay.
If we're gonna keep going, if you're feeling up to it.
Yeah. Sure.
Very good.
Yeah.
So I want to do a bit of history of science, and then we'll explain why history of science is so important.
History of scientific discoveries.
Discoveries, revolutions, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
First, just one last overview of science. One thing that's interesting to think about is this hierarchy in terms of abstraction and fundamentality of these different fields. So you have philosophy as kind of the biggest, the most abstract general field, which is what we're doing now. Then you have math, which is the underpinnings of science. It uses physics, which comes after math, uses math in all of its theories in order to make sound conclusions and real concrete conclusions about the world, what's going to happen in a given experiment with these given starting parameters to create, and we create a model using functions of math. So it goes philosophy, math.
So math uses philosophy.
So math is ultimately like how do we know that math is valid? How is deduction, which is ultimately what math comes down to, what is deduction based off of? And so that comes back to philosophy. So it goes philosophy, math, physics, chemistry, because chemistry and different compounds, elements, they're all physical materials that behave they're all comprised of atoms that behave as, atoms are predicted to behave according to physics. Biology comes after chemistry because all biological animal beings, organisms, have chemistry in their body that comprises their DNA, their hormones, their everything else is carbon, but all of these elements and vitamins and whatever is in the human body, they're all different chemicals. Then you have psychology, which is, every human is ultimately just a biological organism. And then you have economics and sociology.
It's not a premise of psychology, but very well.
That humans are organism?
Well, not
organism?
just a biological organism. You don't have to assume a physicalist worldview when it comes to the human to study psychology. You can study patterns in human behavior while still believing in free will or believing in a soul in the human. You can still study psychology with
consciousness.
Right.
Okay. Then we have economics and sociology, which are just how the masses of people work based off of the individual psychology ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting
hierarchy. It's not just the sum of individual psychologies, sociology.
In a way,
some is bigger
it
than its
is,
parts.
and in a way, it isn't.
Yeah.
Because yes, there is the way to understand that the something is bigger than the sum of its parts. But I still, would push back on that, because if you really knew how each person actually acted, and if that's all a crowd is, then you can predict how the crowd would react. Similarly,
maybe
if you knew every single thing about biology, you could predict how a human would react. And if you knew everything about chemistry, you could predict exactly how every cell in a biology would react. If you knew how every atom would react, you know how every chemical would react. And so you could really
and if you knew... Wait. Keep going.
If you had such a fundamental understanding of math, you could, using physics... I mean, it doesn't perfectly go.
I thought we were going to get to all we have to study is philosophy. If we just master philosophy, we'll master everything.
Technically, in a way, it's true. It's just you'd have to cover so much of philosophy that you're covering everything. And you can't really get there. Obviously, you can't get there just by thinking about it, but you have to actually do experimentation. But if experimentation is part of philosophy, it's just a matter of abstraction. But really, it comes down to, if you want to predict everything in the world, it's just a matter of math and physics.
Well, there's a difference between abstraction and, I'm not sure the word, foundation. There's a difference between abstraction and foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Biology is a foundation of psychology. Psychology is built on biology. Chemistry is a foundation of biology. Is physics a foundation of chemistry?
Yes.
Is physics more foundational than chemistry?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. But I'm not sure...
Physics just predicts how atoms and objects react in the world. Chemistry is more about, okay, given that I know what substances are made of,
okay,
I mix them together, how are they going to react?
Okay, I think I follow. Math, I think in a sense math is more foundational than physics, but it now also is abstracted from the world in which physics exists. So I just came up with this now, but there does seem to me to be a difference between abstraction and foundation. Something that's more foundational, something that...
Or fundamental.
Yeah, like if you imagine a computer system, you got the application layer at the top, which is when you write the code. when you're writing the code, you're relying on so many things. You're relying on the network layer, which is how your device communicates with other devices. And that is reliant on the other layers that are escaping me right now. But eventually you get to, this is reliant on the electrical engineering, right? Eventually the computer is reliant on like the physics of the electricity running through it, right? And how all that works. So it's reliant on electrical engineering. But I wouldn't say that computer science or the theory of computation is now at the bottom of the hierarchy. It's abstracted from the hierarchy.
Right. Yeah. So it's not like a hierarchy strictly that if you had a pure model of philosophy, then all of a sudden you could predict psychology or something.
Mm-hmm.
Philosophy and math are more abstractions of physics, that they deal with more fundamental areas of underpinning physics. But I do believe still that if you have a complete model of physics, then you can also use that ultimately to predict chemistry, biology, psychology, economics, sociology. Is it feasible, though? No. And not only because we're nowhere near there, and because, like we've spoken about in the past, like, can you actually make a reliable model of the universe? There is a concept called multiple realization. So, have you heard of this?
No, but I think I've been waiting to interject with, I think, what you're about to say.
That's what I thought. So, each human, for example, is a physical entity, but is realized uniquely, meaning there's no strict definition given for every human or cell or even chair. So, what does this mean? If you have a human in psychology, right, that could be anyone, and will, how it's realized, how the person's realized will differ from each human to the next. But what psychology tries to do is give us a general model for, in general, how do humans work.
Okay.
And what physics tries to do is give us a model for how atoms work. But just because you know how atoms work doesn't mean that you could just jump to human, because how this human is realized is going to depend on your arrangement of atoms. There are infinite ways to realize what a human is. And so biology, it's a more fundamental understanding of how cells work. But because the ultimate human coming from cells will look completely different, it's going to be extremely difficult to be able to predict or even like address how a human will act, because once you exit that very specific layer of how cells work to get to human, it could just look entirely different across a huge spectrum.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. It's not exactly what I was going to say, but that is a very good point. Right, even if you know everything about Legos, about you still don't know how every Lego structure is made in the world, right? Some kid out there is using Legos to make something creative that he made. You understand Legos very well, but you still don't know what he made until you actually experience and learn the specific thing that he did with them.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something else that I wanted to say.
And also these generalizations are much more useful. So we can't just only study physics and wait until it gives us like a perfect model of the universe before we start studying psychology. We're not going to wait for that.
Okay.
We're going to just assume, we're going to assume some difference and variation between humans, but continue to study them. And similarly for the other, we're going to study
Mhm.
chemistry without understanding completely physics.
Right. But the other thing I wanted to say about the concept of kind of biology is built on chemistry, psychology is built on biology, sociology is built on psychology, and then at one point you said that a society is just a sum of individuals. If you really understood the individuals, you would understand the society. Right?
Yeah.
It's tricky because in the case of atoms in the body, do they behave differently now that they're in a body? I'm not sure.
No.
Okay. Whereas people behave differently when they're in a group. The very fact that they're in a group produces new behavior from the individuals that you wouldn't have been able to study had you never put them in a group together.
Right. So I guess my assumption of psychology would include how people behave within a group.
Okay.
I wasn't really suggesting that if we study a human isolated from the rest of from any other humans, that we would be able to arrive at a model that predicts how they behave. Actually, you know what? I take it back. We would.
If you study a human, isolated from any other humans, and you know everything about that human, you'd be able to understand how they behave even with other humans.
Well, it's kind of a fundamental limitation
Mm-hmm.
on science. If you only study things without the external effect on those things, then yes, you can't really tell. You haven't truly studied that thing.
Uh-huh.
So I still maintain that if you know every position of every cell in the body, and you know how these cells interact to external factors, then assuming you have that knowledge, so if you have that knowledge, that means intrinsically you would understand how they would behave when exposed to a crowd or external factors like a crowd.
Mm.
So it's like contained within that. So if somehow you're able to study the effect, let's say you have a brain, okay?
Like in your hand.
Assumption. Yeah, in your hand.
In your hand, okay.
Okay. You're studying this brain. Okay, a person. You have a person
In your hand.
in your hand. If you know how every external stimuli affects the internal workings of the brain, and for every output you understand for every input you understand how to get the output and can predict the output, then you would know how it would behave in a crowd of people.
Okay.
If you've never studied it in a crowd, that person in a crowd of people, then it's very hard to argue that you know every single output for every given input.
Okay. See, but that's interesting because it seems like a bit of a cheat to say that for every input I understand every output. Well, now I've really gone beyond understanding the human because I'm now understanding the interactions between this human and every other thing. Which very well, if we want to include that in understanding the human, then yes, I can accept that if you truly understood all of that, you would understand how they react in a crowd, and therefore you'd be able to master sociology simply by mastering psychology. But that's not what I was imagining when I was imagining mastering psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ability to get every possible input and know every possible output seems to me to be beyond mastering psychology.
Right. Okay. So I think we sort of agree.
Okay.
So now it's happening. The history of science.
Okay.
Let's do it. Okay. So I wrote down a few things that I think were central two central discoveries, central revolutions
Mhm.
in human history when it comes to science. And feel free to interject what you think about them, feel about them.
Okay.
The first one, we don't know when things start, but I'm going to say the first real discovery,
Fire.
fire. Exactly. Now, I don't think that it followed a scientific method, obviously. I don't think someone was like, I wonder what will happen when I smash these two rocks together.
Mhm.
I think, well, actually, maybe it was scientific, because a lot of the times it doesn't follow a pure objective method. We observe something weird, and then we try to come up with a theory behind it. So what probably happened is a fire started naturally. Lightning, forest fires
Mhm.
happen all the time.
Mhm.
And then you have, this was an incredible revolution for humans, if we were even like humans at that point. We were able to now cook our meat, and we didn't have to eat like other animals. We're the only animals that eat cooked meat in general. Like now we can't handle not uncooked meat in the same way. And there are it breaks down I'm pretty sure it breaks down proteins in a way that allows us to absorb more protein and make us smarter in a way.
Mm. Cooked
Uh,
meat made us smarter.
Yeah, I think there's something behind that. Now, and that kind of fed itself. But this discovery of fire, one of our ancestors, or a bunch of them, they saw this fire. Maybe they observed it, and then they said, "Oh, this is very important. It keeps us warm. It allows us to cook things, even before cooking things, just like keeping us warm." They maybe passed the torch, a physical torch from one generation to the next, but eventually it went out, and they had to think of like, how do we get this again?
Mm-hmm.
There must have been some hypothesizing, like, fire's hot. How do I make things hot? I know when I like rub together things like my hands, they heat up. Friction.
Mm-hmm.
How can I achieve? Maybe if I could like get something hot again, maybe I could like use the sun to dry. It makes things dry. It makes things hot. So they would hypothesize, how do I get this fire thing again? How do I spread it? And then they refined it, that they found, oh, when you rub two sticks together, it makes it really hot. Oh, it's actually like making something similar to heat. Maybe to fire. I know that when I put it out, it needs oxygen. I could put it out by smothering it. So eventually they built a theory of fire, how to create it with flint stones, with sticks and a bow, air blowing on it, tinder, and they perfected it. And this was the most important, probably, technology we've ever made.
Wow.
But the history of it is kind of lost to us.
Uh-huh. But you think it probably was kind of that thinking
Catalyst.
through heat. You're hypothesizing that they noticed the fire is hot, so anytime they could generate something and make it hotter, they were like, maybe this is the path to fire, and that's how they got there eventually.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to me that they just happened to get to a point where they could just create fire consistently by accident. I think a very conscious research must have been done.
Yeah.
Collaboration and testing.
But why do you think they were so insistent on finding it? I mean, there's so many uses for it. Of course, we know how many uses for it there are now. But even then, do you think they realized, like, this
instantly
this
is hot? I could burn down the whole forest with this, and then just go and collect all the dead animals that are pre-barbecued.
Well,
I can
but they were able to eat raw
I
meat.
could see at night.
They were able to eat raw meat in those days, right? Oh,
Yeah.
see at night. That sounds good. Yeah, that's important.
See predators. See.
But it's unclear to me that why they would know that cooking meat was so important.
Maybe that was like a side product. It was more just about being warm or something.
Oh yeah, being warm, living in cold
Conditions.
Yeah,
At night.
yeah. That also makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, being warm and being able to see.
And fighting off predators.
Yeah.
So, I mean, similarly, pottery went through a same thing, and agriculture went through some, just this testing hypothesis method. But, it wasn't, it was kind of more maybe not intuitive, but it was known, it wasn't like analyzed or set aside as like a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your first empires, the Egyptian empires, and like we said, science kind of thrives in empires because it allows more time for individuals to work, to be sponsored, to really show and spread their discoveries to everyone else through the common language of empires, which is something empires bring. Religion as well thrives and flourishes in empires. It also has this aspect of spectacle and everyone being able to see and talk about it and discuss. And maybe scientific discoveries also had that sense of spectacle, like, oh, look at this pot that I made, look at what I'm able to do, and then everyone would gather in the market and say, whoa, that's amazing. And it was not possible when you just have individual tribes roaming from area to area. You have to be able to meet, to collaborate, to have a common setting, and have people kind of working together, or at least seeing what other people have done.
Mm-hmm.
So the ancient Egyptian empire, they came up with heliocentrism. Sorry, not heliocentrism. The other one, where the Earth is the center of everything. Geocentrism.
Okay.
Ptolemy, silent P, was an ancient Egyptian astronomer, and he mapped the heavens, which was also one of these, fire, and then there was the stars, the heavens, and they were very important from a scientific point of view. I think because they're the one thing that's like so abstract, simple, and predictable in terms of patterns in life. You can't coming up with a scientific model of humans, how they're going to behave. Forget it. We struggle with this even nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Food, biology, animals, those are also very difficult. Materials, there's so much that you have to know as a basis to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But when you just have these individual points in the sky that follow patterns where you could predict where they'll be in 6 months, how they are in relation to each other. It's just this. It's basically a math written in the stars that everyone has to know because it's critical for survival to know how to navigate. And I mean, it's not the most critical thing, but it's very important for success. If you can navigate, then trade routes can come together. Then civilized people could find their way back to civilization. They could explore the world, grow empires. So you have this very, the sandbox for humankind. If they could figure out this, which has predictability, which allows them to use tools like math, which is not intuitively applicable to every other place. But here you could record the movements of the stars, and you could say, okay, that takes this long to revolute, and you could come up with a formula of when I will see this star then? When is the Jupiter going to pass in front of us? When is this, when's there going to be an eclipse? When
Yeah.
these were like the first models we could actually build. And then once we realized, oh, wait, models, we could build models of things. And this is useful for prediction. Maybe we could apply this to other places. But I think it was the first really intuitive sandbox. And it just makes you think maybe what would happen if we couldn't see stars or planets. Maybe, if we just had the sun and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the scientific revolution would have been delayed way, way longer. Maybe we would never get there.
Interesting. So astronomy, you're
astronomy.
Suggesting was the beginning of science.
Yeah.
One of the first, the first big scientific revolution was astronomy.
Yeah. Well, fire was the first scientific revolution in terms of testing and just really playing around with things until things would happen. And then pottery and then agriculture. But this idea that math could be applied to science, this idea that you could build a model, that came from astronomy.
I see. Oh, cool. Okay, nice.
Because before that, math and science were completely separate. Math was something for counting, the bushels of grain in your storehouse. That's how, the numbers first came about, which we'll talk about next episode.
Okay.
But, the first recordings were just all about logging. But they weren't about creating a function, a model with predictive power. And then, so Ptolemy came up with this model where the Earth was the center of the universe and could predict the movement of the planets. Then Aristotle came with we spoke about him last time. He had his whole scientific theory, which, is quite questionable now, but that's how they understood things at the time. He said objects have a natural place to which they tend to move, and heavier objects just fall faster because they just have a tendency to move faster. And you had raised a question last time, like, how could that be that, he didn't know about acceleration and just thought, he thought that things only moved at a constant velocity. If they were lighter, then they moved slower. If they were heavier, they moved faster. That's it. What about someone jumping off a building? Obviously, he would die if he jumped off the building, but not if he jumped a foot off the ground.
Yeah.
I looked into it. I couldn't find much explanation. So, I don't know. Maybe.
Thanks for looking into it.
Yeah. Maybe you're just a genius, smarter than Aristotle here. But or maybe I just didn't find a good explanation, or maybe he couldn't think of anything at the time.
Well, I definitely don't think it takes away from it. Let's say Aristotle didn't think of this. It doesn't take away from his genius, and it doesn't add to my intelligence that I thought of this, because
So humble.
Because first of all, I do think that you can have very, very, very smart people who are smart in what they do, and there's something out there that they never really thought about, or they just never really.
Yeah, but it's not like LeBron James talking about politics when he's a genius at basketball. It's
okay.
Aristotle's supposed to be a genius at physics. I guess he is also supposed to be a genius at just philosophy in general, how we understand the world, whether things have form or versus their, implementation.
Okay.
He didn't just talk about science. He had a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
The dialectic,
But I guess all I'm saying is, first of all, it's possible that he did think of it, and we're the broken telephone of getting what he said to this generation has resulted in us thinking that he didn't think of this. It's possible, but also, even if he didn't think of it, it's like, I don't know, people, even the great, make mistakes.
Even the great make mistakes. Yeah.
Cool.
So he also thought heavy objects like stones naturally fall towards their center, while fire naturally moves upwards. That was one of his theories.
Well, that's true. Heat rises.
Heat rises, yeah. So
Okay.
how is this theory useful exactly? I'm not entirely sure. Like what? Yeah, okay, maybe you could get predictions. I guess now you know that when you make something hot, it'll rise. Like, I don't know if you want to make a hot air balloon. So it can maybe help some things, but I don't know. For the most part, it seems like he observed what actually happens and then made laws based off of them, but without being able to like give any usefulness. Like, yeah, we know things fall, but we want to know why or something about that we haven't seen before, and that you could just like predict how it works.
Which you don't think he provided.
Yeah, but maybe we have to have like a real professor of Aristotle on the show. I don't know. I looked into it. It didn't. Maybe heat rising is a useful thing. Fire rising.
You get low when your house is burning down and you want to get out. You should get low.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
You know, there are applications.
There are applications. It just doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a very powerful theory. But
okay.
yeah. And then in the 1500s, so that was early Greece, and then the Roman Empire started, and they're very good at war and siege engines, so they probably discovered more in terms of how to kill people really well and how to build really nice buildings. They did well at plumbing, and we're actually going to Rome in a month.
Nice.
So I'm excited to see all of these this very impressive architecture, arches, streets. They built everything on a huge scale that is very impressive.
The
even by
aqueducts.
today's, the aqueducts. I saw the aqueducts in Caesarea recently.
Oh yeah.
They just go on for like kilometers. You're like, how did they? I can't even like build for me, I don't know. Building a Lego thing takes forever.
Uh-huh.
How did they have the time, the patience, the know-how to build all this?
Yeah.
They did have slaves, which helps. But they're very good at building things. But in terms of understanding more of a theory of nature and the universe, less so, I guess. And then the Dark Ages hit because the Roman Empire became so powerful. Everyone started fighting over the succession, and then they split up. I think you had two different competing powers. There's the Byzantine Empire, and then didn't it split into two?
Yeah. Rome and Byzantium, they split from each other. You had Constantinople as the capital of one, and I'm vaguely familiar, but I can't.
What did it turn
can't reference
into?
everything.
The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, persisted another 1,000 years until 1453. And then there's the Western Roman Empire, which is just a different half of the empire that collapsed in 476 AD.
So almost 1,000 years earlier.
Yeah. But it basically had a lot of these, because it was so powerful, everyone started fighting over it, and therefore it collapsed. And then the church took over with one of the Byzantine emperors, or was it the Roman emperors, that basically accepted, they told everyone to take Christianity.
That was Constantine and Constantinople. That was Byzantium.
That was Byzantium, right.
Yeah.
So then Christianity took over, and with its teachings, suppressed a bit or a lot of scientific knowledge, mostly because anyone that suggested something counter to the narrative in Genesis would be considered a heretic. So if they were to suggest that that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but that the sun is, I'm not sure where it says, in the Bible that the Earth must be the center, but I don't know, they felt like that would be contradicting.
Which is perhaps a good point about religious misinterpretation more than about religion itself.
Mm-hmm.
That there are things that people kind of infer from the language of the Bible that were around for a long time and maybe contradicted with science. And then when they finally accepted the scientific discovery, they realized it's not really what the Bible even says. I was just inferring that is part of what's there. But given that the science says something different, like, okay, then I can just read the Bible differently.
Mm-hmm. And I think you had mentioned something about the roundness of the Earth, and that the Earth is round was something that was known, by the Greeks. Even they were able to even calculate the radius of the Earth, and you could just go to a beach, and either you just look at the horizon and you could kind of see that there's curvature, or you watch a ship sail into the horizon, and you'll see that it disappears mast first.
It disappears mast first. What does that mean?
From the top to the bottom. Like you take a periscope, a telescope.
You'll still see the bottom without seeing the top.
No, opposite. You'll see the top without seeing the bottom because it'll slowly go over the horizon. You're watching a ship set sail.
Mm-hmm.
It's
going away from you.
It's going away from you. Yes. Yeah,
okay.
And so then it starts to disappear. It's a really tall ship. The top of it will go down last because you could only see something like, I don't know. I was reading Life of Pi recently, and he is stranded in the ocean. I think he says you could only see like 80 miles in front of you. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's only like 3 miles.
Mm.
I will look that up. But yeah, that shows that the Earth is curved. Because if it was flat, then you would see everything continue to, as it continues to just shrink in size.
Until it had become so small that you couldn't see it. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't be as if like part of it had disappeared while another part was visible. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I never really thought of that. I'm just trying to look through Genesis here. It just seems to me that it's a natural, if you didn't observe the world and didn't know science and you were just naturally reading the text, it just seems to be a natural inference that like it's saying the Earth is flat. Of course, it's not a necessary inference. Like, it clearly seems to imply that there's Earth, and then there's the heavens above. I'm trying to find like a decent line to pick out.
I will just say that for a person standing at sea level, the horizon is typically about 3 miles away. So it's pretty close because of the curvature of the Earth.
Interesting. Yeah. 3 miles isn't so far.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't know. Maybe it doesn't imply any flatness to the Earth, but I'll just read this part. God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate between water and water." So God made the firmament and separated between the waters which were beneath the firmament and the waters which were above the firmament. So that seems to be talking about the waters on earth and the heavens above. They're implying that there are like waters in heaven as well, but they're above, and then there's waters down here on earth. God called to the firmament heaven, and there was evening and there was morning a second day. And God said, "Let the waters beneath the heaven be gathered into one area, and let the dry land appear." And it was so, and God called the dry land earth, and to the gathering of waters he called seas. There's nothing else that I'm seeing, so I don't know. Maybe that doesn't imply any flatness to the earth at all, but it wouldn't surprise me that people, and maybe it's just because people naturally assume the earth was flat because when you stand on the ground, it just seems that the ground is flat. It's only when you broaden your vision that you see curvature of the earth.
Mm-hmm. Right. But there was really a conflict between the church in the 1500s, in the Dark Ages, and scientific thinkers like Copernicus, who suggested that the sun is at the center of the solar system and I guess the universe, or if he was just saying the solar system, maybe. And they labeled him a heretic, and they suppressed his views. Yeah, and then from there, Galileo studied falling objects. He found they accelerate, like we spoke about last time. He took a ramp with notches and found that there's just universal acceleration, no matter how heavy the object is, and therefore Aristotle was wrong. It doesn't matter about heaviness. It matters the air if we're talking like spheres, it doesn't matter how heavy it is because spheres shouldn't really matter when it comes to air resistance.
Okay.
Although I don't know, I'd have to check my physics on that because I did once speak to someone and they said, no, if you have a larger sphere, then it has more air resistance than a smaller sphere, even relative to its own size, which, I don't know, maybe I guess that makes sense. But if you have a very dense sphere, which is the same size as a non-dense sphere, they will fall at the same time, same speed, same velocity. So if you have a sphere made of metal versus a sphere of styrofoam, they accelerate at the same speed when you drop them.
Okay, yeah.
And like a ton of feathers is heavier than a ton of bricks.
I get it.
You get what? What?
But I also don't get it because I don't get how it connects to the first
No, it
thing you
doesn't.
said.
I just threw that in.
Okay, you threw that in. All right.
And then you have Kepler, who really he studied the stars even more and provided this idea of ellipses. Galileo also invented the telescope, so he could see the moons around Jupiter, how fast they move, and they move a lot faster than Jupiter does around the Earth or something. So it's a lot easier to sit on your balcony at night and look at the moons around Jupiter and see how fast they go. And he was able to show, hey, they actually move around Jupiter, these moons, at the same speed as when I drop, or they accelerate at the same speed that I predict as if I drop something on Earth. Now that I say it, it doesn't sound so obvious how he got to there.
What is it again?
I guess maybe it wasn't him. He was just able to view the moons of Jupiter, but there was something about how he was able to see that gravity is the same, it's universal here on Earth. The speed of gravity that he discovered, 9.81 meters per second squared, the acceleration, is the same that we see on Jupiter and the moons orbiting Jupiter.
Oh, okay.
Because what orbit is really the moons falling towards Jupiter, but missing it. And just always missing it and then going around. But he'd have to have known the masses of Jupiter and its moons. So maybe it was the opposite, that he just assumed universal gravitation, then calculated an estimate of the masses of Jupiter and the Moon.
But wait, the gravitational acceleration is the same on Jupiter as it is on Earth?
Sorry. No, it's not.
Right, that doesn't sound right.
Right. It's universal gravitation. It's the same, so it depends on the two masses at play.
Okay. But that number, 9.81 meters per second squared, is calculated
Unique
from
for
the masses for the mass of Earth.
Yeah, sorry.
So that's on Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what exactly the connection was, but he invented the telescope and optics and using glass to bend it, to refract the light so that he could
The science of which I assume is used in the Hubble Space Telescope as well.
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But he was the father of optics, I think. You have glasses.
And who are we talking about right
Thanks
now?
to Galileo.
Oh, Galileo.
He's one of the. So we talked about Aristotle. Now Galileo. Going back to the Always Sunny in Philadelphia skit.
Yeah.
Okay, Kepler. He showed that the orbit of planets were ellipses. So it's not like a perfect circle. It's more like an oval
Okay.
because they're two focal points. Then Newton comes along, and as Max says, blows everyone's nips off with his big brains. He comes up with the laws of motion, invents calculus. These are, still useful for projectile motion, anything that flies when you throw it, trebuchets, bow and arrows, spears, airplanes,
The Iron Dome.
the Iron Dome, rockets in general.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very critical to everything in our understanding. And we still use Newton to this day for most applications because it's just simpler. It's a simpler model, and it's a very good estimate of the world.
And it's a good way to keep high schoolers busy.
Exactly. And a
Teach them
good introduction.
Newtonian physics.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't just jump to relativity.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll get frustrated and we'll never learn anything.
Yeah.
Then in the 1700s, the microscope was invented around then, allowing us to observe germs for the first time, all these microorganisms that we didn't know existed and had such an effect on our lives.
What year was that approximately?
Approximately 1700.
Okay. That's
If you want
That's fair.
a more...
wow, even 1700 people, they were able to observe germs?
Well, they had telescopes in 1600, so all a microscope is pointing a telescope downwards
Mm-hmm.
and playing with the focus.
Is that correct? It's very much the same science, just one derived from the other?
Yeah, it's just a curved lens,
Okay.
and you have to have light from the other side. There's more to it, but it's and they weren't, the greatest telescopes, but you could probably see small things like onion cells or like large cells relative to smaller cells,
Okay.
skin cells.
So the AI overview on Google says that the first discovery of the first observation of bacteria was in 1676. It's pretty earlier than I was thinking. It was the first using a primitive microscope observing bacteria. But the full understanding that germs cause disease, known as germ theory, did not gain acceptance until the late 19th century, which would be late 1800s.
Yeah. That was Louis Pasteur, Hemmelweis,
Which is where pasteurizing comes from, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
from taking milk and boiling it to get rid of any of the germs.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hemmelweis, he was this scientist that basically there were all these people dying, all these women dying from childbirth in like one part of his hospital, and he was trying to get to the bottom of it. And he, made all of these tests. He said, okay, maybe it's because people are being prayed for in one area of this hospital and they're not in the other. And he did a controlled experiment where he isolated certain variables. He said, okay, these these ones are the ones that the priest visited. These ones are the ones that he didn't. He found no significant difference. And he tried a whole bunch of things. And then he tested something where he moved the surgeons who were handling other patients, or who were handling patients that were dying. He moved like the crematorium or the morgue to some other wing of the hospital, and then all of a sudden the mortality rates dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, "Oh, there's this link. There must be some link between all of these people handling dead people,
Mm-hmm.
all of these physicians handling dead matter, and touching, helping all of these women deliver, and them dying." And he kept a log, he kept track, and then he made this connection, and then eventually he said, "Okay, we should use lye to or soap to wash our hands after, make sure that like there must be some sort of contamination." I don't think he understood what the contamination was, but he understood that there should be. So he looked at the effects without observing it. So he didn't have the direct observation, but was able to build a model simply based off of effects, which was very impressive and very important for development of science.
And who was this again?
He was a doctor named Hemmelweis.
Okay.
And then eventually they figured out it was germs.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the 1800s, we have electromagnetism. Chemistry gets a huge boost. So electromagnetism is just that the whole world now works on electricity, and finding out that magnetism and electricity are the same thing. One can be converted one to the other. So if you have a generator, if you want to generate electricity, you move a magnet around a coil of wire, and then you can generate electricity. So you put you put a water mill or a wheel in water, and then it spins, it'll generate electricity. And conversely, you could create a motor by passing electricity through through a coil of wire with a magnet in the middle, and then the magnet will turn, and then you get a motor. Mm-hmm. So they're one and the same. In the 1800s, we also had Darwin. He explored, what was that country off the coast of Africa? Galapagos. Was one of them. So he went on his voyage to classify all of these animals, come up with his theory of evolution, that species are part of this big tree of life where you have different branches for each one that have common ancestors that split into different ones based off of different traits and genetic mutations that were more useful than others. And then you had the invention of the steam engine, where you could heat up coal, you burn coal that emits hot gases, which could turn a turbine at the top, and then using gears, improve the amount of power that's being done and the gear ratio, so you can move really large things with high torque based off of fast moving motion from the steam engine. And then you have with the steam engine, you could have trains going from one place to the next, delivering goods, improving and running the whole Industrial Revolution. You have the invention of the radio, where you could communicate over long distances instantaneously without having to pass a letter and deliver it by hand. The telegraph. In the early 1900s, you have Einstein comes along with relativity, more accurate than Newtonian mechanics. You have quantum mechanics, which contradicts relativity in a way and tells us about the nature of atoms. Chemistry. In chemistry, you had the development of the periodic table of elements, which is a breakdown of how to really analyze every element, what each element is made up of, what they have in common, and allows us to make predictions about what happens when we combine certain ones and what each element is able to do. And they would discover more and more elements as it came about, and they would fill in these places in the table. So they were able to predict what should come there, what should be in that place, and how many neutrons we'd expect it to have. And they had to develop this table. It wasn't clear that there was some periodic nature to elements that they repeat. Once you get to one end of the table, then every row has certain qualities. Like the noble gases all line up in one column. So once you get to the end of the row, you'll get back to another noble gas because of the amount of electrons in the outer orbit of every atom. Certain atoms want in different layers. They're the P and S layers or whatever. They want 8 electrons as opposed to 2 electrons in the first, in the innermost layer. So you have these characteristics that repeat each other based off of these layers. And then we get to motors, airplanes, cars in the early 1900s. That changes everything in terms of traveling and moving things around. Antibiotics, vaccines were discovered that you could, introduce a bit of the virus itself. That's, a much weaker strain of the virus that the body can get over so that it develops an immunity to it and is able to identify and attack it. That actually helps it beat off larger doses of the virus in the future. And now you don't have billions of people dying from the Spanish flu, from measles, smallpox, all of these massive polio, like these terrible things that were just wreaking havoc on the human population for a long time. Now we grow and grow, and people don't have to have as many children, I guess, or they don't because the mortality rate is lower. They also invent contraceptives around this time. The mid-1900s, and that probably allows people to focus more on careers, and it just has a societal, cultural impact.
You're talking about contraceptives?
Yeah, I brought that up for a second.
Okay.
We could get more into that if you want, but
not this episode.
Okay.
There's a lot to talk about there.
A lot to talk about. Mid-1900s, we get to rockets, space exploration, leaving Earth, exploring the moon, really showing what could be done as a species. We get to atomic energy, nuclear fission, and showing how devastating we could all be as a species and how we could kill each other and end the world. Now it's within our grasp. Lasers for accuracy, for a whole bunch of important applications. With space exploration comes GPS, and eventually in the late 1900s, I will add transistors to the mid 1900s. The first computers were invented early 1900s when they're trying to solve the Enigma.
Well, that was already late 30s.
Yeah. So I kind of lumped them together a bit, but transistors. So those worked off of vacuum tubes, like light bulbs or similar to light bulbs or something. But then with transistors, you could pack a lot more in, and then you actually have, instead of a few bytes of data, you can now have megabytes, kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes. And in the late 1900s, we start having computers, the internet. We all know how that has been. We've lived through this revolution.
Invented by Al Gore.
Al Gore invented the computer?
The internet.
The internet, yes.
I'm joking.
hmm It's invented at Princeton, I think,
Okay.
and it was used to send emails between faculty members. And then eventually everyone's like, wait, I want this.
Uh-huh.
And everyone wanted it. And then batteries using lithium took over. They used to have batteries in the 1900s, but they didn't work in the same way. They weren't efficient. They weren't stable without blowing up. Lithium really changed the game. John Goodfellow, I think, invented or was part of. It was 3 people that kind of popularized it, and figuring out what to use. I saw a Veritasium video on this recently. That allowed phones and all sorts of devices, laptops, enabling us to travel with our computers. So that I could come over here and do the show. Although I guess I could have just plugged everything in. And then in this century, medicine continued to develop over the past century, but things have gotten better and better. The more accurate. Now we're moving towards mapping the whole genome of the human and being able to predict and figure out using a lot of computer algorithms, using internet collaboration, solving and AI to fold proteins to really solve a lot of diseases and invent the cures that will take care of them. And we're also moving more towards AI and robotics, where it'll take over. We have ChatGPT, which we lived through that revolution. It'll take over a lot of jobs in certain ways. Hopefully, not all jobs. And robotics will continue to improve and then deliver things and electric cars, etc. And that's the future.
But there's no replacement for human communication, face to face.
Exactly.
And
we could come close.
And other things. There's no replacement for a lot of things, I think. But
right.
We can talk about that.
There's no replacement for, the bond between a cab driver and his horse when he's, driving his buggy.
You're being sarcastic.
No.
Because
am I?
You are, but they're like the connection between a mother and a child would be a good example.
Mm-hmm.
We're not close to being able to create an AI that you can put a child in front of and convince the child that it's his mother.
Well, we're not close to completely replacing it, but we've always been edging towards such a thing closer and closer. It used to be, the bond between a mother and child was, I don't know. She would raise him until 10, 13. I don't know. Now we have, then eventually we have teachers who would take over. Kindergarten teachers would raise the child. Babysitters. Now we have school online, YouTube. YouTube is raising our children. We have people talking to ChatGPT as if it's their therapist. Maybe the next generation will.
These are not replacements. These are distractions, if anything. I mean, or just additions. These are in addition to, not in replace of. We're not close to replicating the bond between a mother and child via AI or machines or technology or whatever you want, or anything you want to use.
They are cheaper imitations, sure. But when you have a child bond more with his phone than with his mother, then it detracts from his bond with his mother. So it's more taking over than replacing.
Okay, yeah, but that's not an accomplishment. That's a drawback of technology. That is one of the downsides of technology, because of course technology always has good sides and bad sides. So it's not as if we've accomplished anything by that drawback existing.
Well, we freed up more time for mothers to pursue their careers, which I'm sure can be argued is not necessarily a good thing.
Or even if you want to argue that that is a good thing, you still haven't accomplished what I'm just using the bond between a mother and a child as an example of the clear limitations of technology where it's at right now, and especially AI, which I have a completely different perspective on AI than you do, which is fine. AI is just another tool. It's just we've just made machines do something a little more sophisticated. It's easy to think that we've created something completely different than what we've created in the past, which we haven't.
Okay, but the car replaced the horse and buggy.
Yes.
Did it? But it didn't truly replace it, because nothing can truly replace it. But it took its place, so it replaced it.
It accomplished the function just as well and better, and therefore it replaced it.
I see. What is the function of a mother to its child?
Well, that's a big. I feel like
we don't have to get into.
I think we're reaching an ending point. So I think whatever topics we're opening up here at the end, I think
we'll keep on
save for later.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So, scientific revolutions.
Mm-hmm.
We saw them through the history of science, and we touched upon this at the beginning. But I want to go into the two schools of thoughts. One is the logical positivists, and they say that how hypotheses are arrived at are subjective. So, you could see in a dream how you're gonna how you come up with the structure of a chemical. That's what one scientist did. But the testing is always logical and objective. So they claim that this is objective, science is objective, the testing is objective. They claim that there's an algorithm for science, otherwise it's irrational. Something that you could follow step by step. And the first question is, does objective truth actually exist? Is this like a thing? Is it attainable? Can you claim that science is objective? That it, that there's something that we could always test if it follows the reality. If it's based in reality, then it's subjective, and science is this pure thing that we could follow. Or is it just unattainable? There's always going to be social taints, social biases of people, and don't different scientists from different eras interpret the observed data differently? They could look at the same data, but they'll see it in a different way. Even if you test it, it's kind of inevitable that there's going to be some social human projection onto this. And then you have the layman versus the expert. How Dennis looks at the facts and figures, it's not going to be the same as when an expert looks at the facts and figures. But that's what the logical positivists hold, that there is some sort of objective nature to science, and that we could grasp onto. On the other hand is Kuhn, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He says, no, you have scientific revolutions, meaning there's a current paradigm of science. So, the logical positives will say there's a revolution in science. Maybe the people have changed, and the theory is just shown to be wrong, but the methods underlying it are, they're consistent. There's got to be something that we could always hold on to. Mm-hmm. But Kuhn says, no, we have our current paradigm of science, the assumptions, the methods, and values, and it's accepted, unquestioned. And if you find inconsistencies when you're doing your testing, then that's part of the experiment. You must have done something wrong. It's not the paradigm's fault. But then eventually these inconsistencies pile up, and then a crisis begins, and scientists everywhere start putting forward different paradigms and a new theory. So I'm thinking, let's say geocentrism versus heliocentrism, or Einsteinian mechanics versus Newtonian. And eventually this paradigm takes over through peer pressure, through rhetoric, through charisma, through a mob mentality, that demonstrates and pushes everyone to say, no, how we were looking at things before doesn't add up. You have to consider this new way of thinking. Even though your previous experiments were valid in a way, your theory was successful. Now we have an even more successful theory. You can't keep being part of that old paradigm. You have to accept this new one. So it's not just objectively there's this thing that is consistent, that doesn't change, and it's just the theories that somehow change. It's that the whole paradigm that consists of the current scientific truth gets overridden and has this subjective quality to it. Do you have anything to add to that, or?
I'm not sure what the practical distinction is between the two of them.
Right.
Because the logical positivists would accept that our understanding of reality can change. Surely, you can't possibly deny that.
Right. They would say the understanding, like new theories come forward, but it's just this like serial consecutive process where, okay, we have this theory and then it's accepted. Oh, it's proven false. So we need another theory to replace it.
Okay.
But Kuhn would say it's not such a clean process, predictable process. It doesn't always follow some recipe. We have to accept that it could come out of any place. We have to accept that there's an element of subjectivity to this. The practical
anyone can cook.
Anyone could cook.
Like in Ratatouille.
Exactly.
I think perhaps we should take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps there can be a part 3.
A part 3.
I don't know if there's more material.
I still have another 2 pages.
Okay, that's far too many pages to finish today. I think we've already gone for over 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't eat lunch.
Yes, my tummy is starting to rumble now that you mention it.
Okay, good.
But am I objectively hungry?
Well, it's just
a feeling in your mind.
It's just a feeling in your mind, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is hunger?
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't listen to that feeling, then you'll eventually die.
Eventually. But sometimes, you think, oh, I'm going to die if I don't eat within the next few hours. But you could last 3 weeks without...
with water.
With water. I do think that as a society, at least our culture values food a little too much.
Yeah.
I think we eat way more than we need to.
Yeah, we do.
And I'm realizing this as I get older.
Yeah.
Not just from a health perspective, just like I don't know. I don't need to spend so much money on food. I think the advertising of, big food companies, they've won. Like, I'll look at other cultures and, I'm like, why do they spend so much on perfume, cologne, and like new watches and cars. I'm like, isn't that a waste of money? Like, just why not save your money and I don't know. I'd go on, a vacation or something. But then I'm like, wait, I spent so much on food.
Hmm.
It's one of the pleasures of life. I don't know. It's just not. I don't eat necessarily because I need to all the time. It's more for the pleasure of eating something new.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, we are pretty irrational with food. Seinfeld has a good bit about food and how it's unfair that restaurants make you pay after you've eaten. Um,
Okay.
or like they give you the check after you've already eaten. Because he says like before you've eaten, you'll order anything. Money is no object. Money doesn't matter. We're hungry. We'll eat. Well, give us this, give us that. And then only after you've eaten and you get the check, you're like, why did we spend this much money? Why did we eat this much? I'm no longer hungry. So, of course, Seinfeld, of course, says this in a funnier way. I hope.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's not so much as unfair as much because, like, it's actually more unfair to give you the check at the beginning because you're willing to pay anything. And it's more exploitative. But I'm just saying, like, the word, maybe it's more like confusing.
Yeah, I don't know
why they would give you it at the end.
I don't know if Seinfeld ever used the word unfair, but I think that's what he was trying. I mean, whatever. It's not that important. But
it's like tipping. You give a tip at the end, or you don't give, or you withhold a tip, which doesn't make any sense. Because if you're gonna give a tip, then you expect higher service, and then they should, give higher service based off of relative to the tip that you gave. And if you give nothing, expect nothing.
Well, you tip relative to the service. They don't serve relative to the tip.
But they don't know how much they're going to receive before, and nothing really holds me to getting to giving a tip at the end.
Well, yeah, but that's the point. You're not supposed to be obligated to tip.
So then I should never tip, and then they should always give me good service in the hope of a tip.
But then if no one ever tipped, then you won't get good service.
Sure, but I'm just saying on an individual level, if I was actually waiting as a waiter in a restaurant, I would much rather have the tip beforehand so I could know to expect how much service to give. And then, if they don't want to give a tip, good for them. I don't have to pay them as much attention. And they're happy, I'm happy.
Well, it's I think it's more that we're giving the consumer. You're not giving the consumer enough power. I don't think.
You're saying he could give a higher tip at the beginning, and I could say, "Oh, he gave me the tip already, so I don't have to give him any service."
Yeah, you could say that, or you're just making the consumer give a high tip without having received any service yet. The consumer deserves more power than that. The consumer gets to wait to see the quality of the service, and only then decide on a tip.
It's the classic issue of negotiation or trade or something. Like if you're trading something, who is there's no way to really give something simultaneously in a lot of choices. If you're doing a prisoner exchange, how do you, it's like in the TV shows, you're both waiting for the guy to cross the line and the prisoners cross at the same exact time.
Yeah.
But then, what's stopping one from shooting the other guy's prisoner? Well, the fact that they could shoot your prisoner or something. So,
well, actually, this is a great topic. We could have another episode on this. Jordan Peterson, I heard once brought up the concept of eBay, right? Why does eBay even work, right? You're doing business with complete strangers, and not only that, they're you pay them money and then they send you something. Why aren't they just keeping your money and not sending you something? Or why aren't they sending you a broken thing? And
they do sometimes,
but
then their reputation
exactly. eBay
down.
Wouldn't exist if that happened too often. The reason eBay exists, I don't know. Does anyone still use eBay? But the fact that it existed at least for a long time,
for finding old things that aren't as accessible now. On Amazon, you could only find the newest things. But if I'm looking for an old pair of sneakers that I really I really liked, and I want another pair of them,
Uh-huh.
only on eBay.
Yeah, but the point I'm getting to is that there's great power in the, in honest business. That might be that might be a cornerstone of human society, and that's the reason why we're able to build economies and do business with each other, is because there is trust. There is we don't need to make sure the prisoners cross at the same time. We don't need to be so pedantic and specific and vigilant about people screwing us over. There's an element of no, we made a deal. You'll come through on your end. I'll come through on my end. If you do screw me over, I'm never doing business with you again. But is that the only reason why people don't screw each other over? I think there's like a fundamental human understanding, a common understanding that like we made an agreement, we're both gonna oblige.
It's like a holy
to
thing to break your word.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you can, but then all hell will break loose.
The truth is, all hell will break loose. If that didn't exist, if that ability for humans to come to an agreement and trust that each of them will uphold the agreement, if that didn't exist, society would collapse.
Mm-hmm. The same with science, except in science, one person has the power to bring everything down. He could say, "Wait, you guys have all been saying the wrong thing. You're all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'll show you. I'll demonstrate it." In business, if one person goes against everything, then either, he could be taken out by larger competitors, or, he could be pushed around a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. We're going to have a food break, and then we'll be back, maybe, to the Benjy and Cal podcast.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening.
So long.